Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the DN WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Hisashi's return from America wasn't a good thing. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku feels exhausted after spending the whole afternoon training his quirk. His bones ache more than he would like to admit, but at least he tells himself it means he's making progress. His shirt sticks to his back because of all the sweat he accumulated whilst training, so he decides to take a quick shower before doing anything else. Izuku thinks the feeling of water sliding down his skin after a hard day is one of the most comforting things there are. After going back to his room, Izuku wants nothing more than to plop down on his bed to sleep. He could, technically. It's Friday, and he could sleep in tomorrow morning as well, but he hasn't had dinner yet and he's starving. On most nights, Lunch Rush will prepare dinner for everyone in Heights Alliance. But on other nights, the best ones, in Izuku's opinion, his classmates will ask the cook hero not to do anything. And then they'll all work together to make delicious food. Once he heads downstairs and into the kitchen, he's glad to find it's one of those nights. He helps to set the table, laughing while Kaminari tries to hide from Gyro after making a terrible joke. The smell of the rice and meat cooking along with the sound of laughter from all his friends fill the space. The lights in the common room match beautifully with the darkening sky outside, and he finds himself smiling at how peaceful everything is. Izuku reaches for his phone to take a picture of his friends, all of them doing their own share of work to help. It'll be nice to look back at later, in a few days or maybe years. He only has enough time to take one before the screen shows someone calling him. It's his mother, which is weird because she usually texts him to make sure he's free to talk. It must be important, and so he picks up right away. "Mom?" he asks, cupping the bottom part of his phone to block out the noise. There's some static on the other end, and Izuku recognizes it from when his mother calls him from her car. "Izuku." She sounds happy, and not in panic or scared like Izuku had feared she would. "I'm on my way to UA now. I've talked with your teachers and they've allowed you to come home for the weekend." "What?" Izuku turns around so his back is facing his classmates. "I mean, that's great, but why so sudden?" He could practically hear the smile his mother is making right now, and he doesn't want to ruin that. But still, shouldn't she have talked to him about it beforehand? "I have a surprise waiting for you," she says. "I'm almost there, so go make your bag really quick." Izuku's classmates are giving him sideways glances, some pointing their chins up at him to ask if he's alright. He gives them a thumbs up, not wanting to worry them. He would prefer to stay here with his friends. But now that he thinks about it, it's been a while since the last time he had spent time with his mother. "Yeah, sure, text me when you get here." He hangs up the phone and turns around to see his friends putting the warm food on the table, steam escaping into the air. Izuku stands still for a moment, feeling sad he'll miss out on this. "Midoriya, are you coming?" Todoroki asks him, his upper body twisted in his chair to face Izuku in an empty seat beside him. Izuku gives him an apologetic look. "I'm sorry, my mom just called," he says. "She's on her way to pick me up." This seems to perk the interest of a few of his other classmates. Todoroki's frowns. "Did something happen?" he asks, concerned. "Not really, she just wanted to spend the weekend together, I think." The teen with two-tone eyes nods, and Izuku takes that as his cue to head for his room. He packs his bag quickly. He still has some clothes at home, and he'll be back in 2 days anyway. He doesn't bother taking the elevator back down. Instead, he takes the stairs and skips a few. Izuku utters a small goodbye to his friends and walks out of the dorms. The sky is still a nice shade of blue, the kind Izuku can't take pictures of without his phone showing the wrong color. The breeze is soft on his cheeks, but it doesn't do much to help the knots forming in his stomach. There's nothing hinting at a possibility of things going wrong. Actually, what could go wrong? He has gone back to his house a couple of times before ever since the dorm system was put in place, and it always went smoothly. But for some reason, he feels anxious. Izuku shakes his head. He's probably just tired. Maybe going back home will do him good. He scans his card at the main entrance and exits school grounds. At the same time, he feels his phone buzz in his pocket. He opens it and sees it's a text from his mother telling him she's there. When he lifts his head up, he sees her waiting in their small car, her face lit up by the blue light of her screen. By the time she notices him, Izuku is already opening the door to the passenger seat. She smiles at him and puts her phone down before taking off again. The ride is quiet. They both exchange a few words here and there about their day and that new movie that came out. Izuku can see how excited his mother looks. Maybe it's about that surprise she was talking about. He doesn't want to ask her though. He knows she won't tell him until he sees it himself. "I could have taken the train, he says. It's true, and maybe it would have been even faster. He wonders why his mother came all the way here just to bring him back home. She taps her fingers on the steering wheel, leaning her head toward him without taking her eyes off the road. "Oh well, you know, this felt like a special opportunity." "What do you mean?" he asks, even though he knows he won't get a real answer. "You'll see," she says, and Izuku can't help but smile at seeing her mom so fired up about something. She's always worrying and fretting over him. It's nice to see her like this. Eventually, they get to the parking lot of their apartment building. His mother takes his hand and squeezes it, the corner of her lips turning up. They take the stairs, like they've always done, ever since Izuku was a child. The elevator works just fine, but for some reason, his mother and he have made a silent agreement to never use it unless they absolutely needed to. His mother hurries to reach the door before him. She unlocks the door and peeks inside before letting him enter. Izuku tilts his head, now very curious about what she could have been planning. She tells him to wait in the entryway right after taking her shoes off and putting on her slippers. Izuku takes his own shoes off and waits for his mother to come back. It smells different than the last time he was here, which couldn't be too long ago. Actually, the place feels different in a way words can't explain. Izuku doesn't understand what it is. Nothing seems to have changed much. Everything looks pretty much the same. It takes him a moment to notice them, but after he can't look at anything else. So out of place, Izuku doesn't know how he missed them. Some different shoes, black fancy ones. They're definitely too big to be for him, even more so for his mother. As he goes to examine them more closely, he hears footsteps. He knows how his mother walks, and what her footsteps sound like. He has lived with her his entire life. The problem is she's not alone, but Izuku can't discern who the other person might be. And then, a man steps into view, his mother grabbing onto his forearm with a grin on her face. At first, Izuku doesn't understand what's going on, so he just awkwardly stands there and smiles, trying to hide the frown forming on his face. Oh. It takes a few seconds for him to finally understand everything. And then it hits him. The dark curly hair that matches his, and those freckled cheeks. It's his dad. Can he even say dad? Or has it been too long? It definitely has. But then again, calling him Midoriya-san doesn't feel right either. And he's not close enough to say Hisashi. Izuku doesn't know what to do, if he should do anything at all, that is. He hasn't seen his father in years. He could lie and pretend he remembers spending some time with him when he was younger, but the truth is he doesn't. He remembers a door slamming, a house emptier than when he had first found it the same morning. He remembers his mother crying and trying to hide it when he would try to comfort her. But seeing this man, for the first time in years, with his mother clinging to him and a smile on both their faces, it's like none of it even happened in the first place. It feels as if they're both ignoring, forgetting this part of the story, and he's the only one in the room to remember. Hi, Izuku finally manages to say. His voice comes out in a high pitch. And although he knows it's mostly due to his uneasiness, his parents probably think it's because he's shy or surprised, which he is, but not in the way they think he is. Izuku, the man says, making the teen's eye twitch. Do you remember me? Been a while. After all, he laughs, and Izuku stands there uncomfortably, unsure how he's supposed to reply to that. Yes, he utters. I remember. It's not true, obviously, but he can't bring himself to ruin the moment. Come on now, you two, his mother says, breaking the uneasy silence that was starting to linger in the air. Dinner is ready. She lets her hold on his father's arm fall and heads for the kitchen. Izuku puts on his slippers quickly. His father is back. He doesn't quite understand, and now that the news finally sinks in, his legs feel weak and he almost stumbles after taking a single step. The man is still watching him from his spot, not having moved an inch. He laughs under his breath when Izuku stops to let him walk before him. His mother made katsudon, his favorite. Usually, he loves it and would eat it every day, but for some reason, it annoys him to eat something he likes so much with someone on who he has conflicted opinions. It's mostly the two adults who talk together while Izuku listens. He'll keep his eyes glued on his bowl, and sometimes he'll lift his eyes up to look at his mother, but their gazes never meet. At some point, he glances in his father's direction and finds him making a weird face while chewing the food. At some point, Izuku decides to speak up. Are you spending the weekend with us? He asks, trying to make small talk with the man, if only so it can make his mother happy for a moment. Hisashi, you have to tell him, she says with a grin on her face, her palm on top of the man's hand. Izuku frowns. Tell me what? He tries to sound happy, but he feels more anxious than anything else if he's being honest. He doesn't want any more surprises. He's not glad his father is home, nor is he overjoyed like his mother. Maybe he should be, and maybe he's a terrible person for not feeling that way. But this man, this stranger, left them years ago, only bothering to call a few times each year to talk with his mother. But never for him. His father straightens up in his seat and turns to face Izuku. Well, I was thinking maybe I would stay here for a little longer than just the weekend. He looks at his mother and takes her hand in his, giving it a light squeeze. It's so weird to see someone be so affectionate with his mother. It has only ever been her and Izuku for as long as he can remember. It wasn't been much, but it had been, still is, enough for Izuku. His mother rolls her eyes before leaning toward him. Hisashi isn't planning on leaving, she announces cheerfully. Izuku feels all the blood drain from his face. That's great, he says, forcing an awkward smile on his face. His mother buys it, somehow, or maybe she's just too happy to notice how uncomfortable he looks. Unlike his father, whose expression hiding behind his irises shows he's not ignorant of the way Izuku feels about him. He excuses himself from the table to go wash the dishes. Izuku grabs his empty bowl along with his mother's, but when he reaches for his father's, the man gets to his feet and offers to help him. The teen tries to reassure him it's fine, but the dark-haired man insists and walks past him. His mother grabs Izuku's shoulder before he leaves. She tilts her head to the side toward his father. He's trying really hard, she whispers. Well, maybe she did notice him not being so happy about the man's return. He nods before walking up to the sink. They both share what little space the kitchen offers to wash the dishes. Neither of them utters a single word for a while, and Izuku decides he certainly won't be the one taking the initiative to start a conversation. But he's willing to answer if it makes his mother happy. Katsuden, his father says, shaking his head with a small smile on his face. I remember you used to like it so much when you were younger, he chuckles, and Izuku is taken aback that the man would remember something like this. Well, it seems that's still the case. Yeah, Mom's the best at making it, he responds, the corner of his lips turning up. That woman's really amazing, he says, turning his head to look at where Izuku's mother must be sitting on the couch, watching the television. He turns back to washing the bowl in his hands. Speaking of amazing things, I watched the sports festival this year. Izuku almost drops the pan he's holding. Right, he was competing in the sports festival. He doesn't know what to answer, can't seem to find the words. Did his father see his quirk and suddenly took an interest in him? No, he thinks, don't make this about yourself, it has nothing to do with you. Your friend, Katsuki. He won, didn't he? What incredible firepower. Kaken's incredible, Izuku mumbles. The man laughs at this. He really is from what I could see, he says. And so were you, with that quirk of yours. He shakes his head. Wish I could have been there to see it bloom. Maybe if you hadn't left in the first place. The words are out of Izuku's mouth before he can think better of it. But he doesn't really regret it, because he is mad. His father can't just show up after over a decade of silence and expect them to welcome him with open arms. To Izuku, he's just a stranger, an undesired guest in their home. Or well, perhaps he's not a stranger, because then Izuku would have no reason to be angry at him. The man clicks his tongue, placing the last bowl on the drying rack. There was nothing I could do, I had to leave for work. He explains. It's too late. Izuku rarely feels so annoyed, but right now anger bubbles up in his chest. Did you? He snaps back. What's going on here? He hears his mother ask behind him, but when he turns around, the gleeful expression she had worn earlier is gone, replaced by a questioning look. Izuku, she asks more quietly. He doesn't say anything else, can't bear to see the look on her face. Now he's ruined the one good thing his mother had, and he doesn't even have a good excuse. Izuku doesn't argue when she asks to speak alone with him. She closes the door to Izuku's bedroom behind her. Izuku, she starts, I know this is hard for you. He left without a word years ago. Now he comes back and I'm supposed to just like him? He shouts. He never fights with his mother, and he feels something pinch at his heart when he sees the surprised expression on her face. She blinks. He didn't leave, she says. But it sounds more as if she were repeating something she had told herself before. He went away for work, but now he's back and you can't be mad at him for that. Izuku feels his eyes start to burn, but he won't let a single tear fall in front of his mother. It's funny, he says with a hollow laugh. It was right around the time I got diagnosed as quirkless. The only light in the room is the lamp on Izuku's desk, flickering because of the old light bulb. It bothers him more than it should, but he keeps his feet planted on the ground, doing his best to ignore it. Izuku, oh, baby, she puts a hand over her mouth. Is that what you've been thinking? She takes a step forward and reaches for his arm, but he steps back. Mom, this is exactly what happened and you know. That's enough. Her own eyes become watery. If you don't like him, that's fine, she says. But I still love him, so don't say all those things about your father. Those things. Izuku doesn't know how his mother doesn't understand. He doesn't remember much about his father, that much is true, but he does remember some things. He remembers how one day they were 3 in the house, and the next they were only 2. He can still remember the moment his father left. How Izuku had hidden in his room, his ear glued to the door to try and make out the words being exchanged. Later, he had listened to his mother's sobs echoing from the kitchen late at night. Had she forgotten that? Maybe she had tried to, just like Izuku had. But unlike him, she had been successful. You've done enough for tonight, she says. I'd like for you to apologize tomorrow. Izuku knows she's not asking him, and that he doesn't have a choice. He clenches his fists on his sides and waits for his mother to leave his room before going to lock it. He stays like this, his entire body pressed against the door and his fingers holding the lock. Izuku does this sometimes, when he's scared something might happen. He doesn't know why it makes him feel safer. The lock is really cheap and even he could break it easily. Maybe it's because he'd been able to convince himself it would protect him when he was still a child. At some point he lets his hand fall and sits on the floor, his back resting against the door. He wishes he would have stayed with his friends instead. His father's presence felt like someone was intruding on his life, and now this tiny apartment he'd used to love doesn't feel much like home. It feels too big, and Izuku feels so small. He takes his phone out and sees a couple of texts from his friends, telling him to have a nice weekend. He almost sends them a text explaining the situation, but ends up deleting it. He remembers the picture of his friends he'd taken right before his mother had called, and he thinks maybe seeing it again will comfort him. But when he clicks on it, the one picture he'd managed to take, he finds it blurred. A tear rolls down his cheeks, and Izuku thinks it's so stupid that this is what makes him cry. Not the argument he's had with his mother, nor the return of his father. No, instead, it's a blurry image. He feels so alone right now, in his locked bedroom, now emptied of almost all the furniture he had brought to his dorm. There are no leaves rustling outside, no wind brushing against his window. The only things he hears are the faint sound of the television playing in the living room and the hushed conversation of his parents. Izuku wants to leave, but he knows he can't do that yet, so he waits. Izuku wakes up to the sound of laughter. He winces when the dazzling light of the sun hits his face, having no curtains to block it. It takes his eyes a few seconds to adjust, and when he sits up he remembers the events of the night before. He slides his hands down his face, wishing he could have had more time to sleep. The bed makes a squeaky sound when he gets up. It's not his usual mattress. He'd also brought that to his dorm, and he had slept terribly all night. He stands in the middle of his room and looks around. He's going to have an awful day if thinks negatively right after waking up. Izuku takes a deep breath and unlocks his door before stepping out. The muffled voice becomes clearer the closer he gets to the kitchen. His mother is laughing at a joke his father just told. Izuku walks past them into the sink to make himself a glass of water. He really wants to say something. Or well, it's more like he knows he should say something, but the words die in his throat before he has a chance to open his mouth. He rapidly drinks the content of his glass and almost chokes when his mother calls his name. Izuku, she says, giving him the courage to finally look at her. She doesn't look upset or mad like yesterday, and it makes him relax a bit. She tilts her head in his father's direction subtly and stares at him expectantly, raising her eyebrows. Izuku doesn't do anything for a few seconds. He'll have to apologize at some point, and he doesn't want to ruin this for his mother. He clears his throat and turns his gaze to the man she seems to love so much. "I'm sorry about yesterday," he says. It's different from when he says sorry after bumping into someone or dropping his pen. Now, Izuku doesn't mean it, and he hates that he even has to apologize in the first place. His father laughs a bit. "Oh no, don't worry my boy, I understand." He puts the cup of coffee he's holding down. "My boy," he'd said, exactly like All Might. Izuku shakes the thought away. He doesn't want to associate this man with his mentor. "I don't expect you to forgive me yet, but I'll try my best to make it up to you." There's something about the way he says it that makes Izuku doubt his words. Or maybe he's just imagining it, and the man really is sincere. Izuku had been hungry before, but now just thinking about food makes him cringe. He wonders if he should go back to his room or sit at the table. He lingers by the sink until his mother starts talking again. "I was thinking we could all go out for dinner," she says. That's the last thing Izuku wants. In fact, he would like to just go back to UA now. His father smiles. "That's a great idea, dear." When Izuku had been younger, after the man had already left, he had asked his mother why he didn't have two parents like his other classmate. She had explained to him that Izuku did have two in the beginning, but that they had fallen out of love. He wondered if one day she would find someone else, and if it would make his mother happier. She kept telling him how he was all she could ever need in her life, but perhaps she had been lying. Now, Izuku wonders if she had ever truly moved on. He had never considered the cost of her happiness would be the bond they had formed over the years. There's smooth jazz playing in the background, and dozens of different voices overlapping. The warm lights looming over the tables make the space look cozy. A waitress walks them to their table. It has 4 chairs, but there are only 3 of them. Izuku quickly takes the seat on the right of his mother, and his father takes the one on her left. His mother and he hadn't gone to a place so fancy in a while. It had always been too expensive. Izuku holds his phone under the table while his parents talk together, switching back and forth between texting with his friends and playing a game. It doesn't take long before he starts getting bored. He knows he should probably be more grateful to his parents for bringing him along with them. But in truth, he doesn't even want to be here in the first place. He orders the cheapest thing on the menu and goes back to playing the game on his phone. At some point, his mother gets up to go to the bathroom and leaves the other 2 alone. Izuku is frustrated. He usually never acts like this. He doesn't spend dinner on his phone, doesn't feel so angry without a reason, or just acts so rudely. He risks a glance at his father and finds the man looking at him. The moment their eyes meet, Izuku feels his face turn red before closing his phone. It's so awkward. This whole situation is, Izuku doesn't know what it is though. Maybe because of the fight he's had with his mother yesterday, or because he's still mad at the man for leaving all those years ago and coming back as if nothing ever happened. His father slumps back in his chair before speaking up. "What are you doing on your phone?" he asks, as if he were interested in what Izuku was doing. "Just texting with some friends. You could talk with us instead." The man laughs, and Izuku doesn't know what to reply to that. They've been sitting at this table for over an hour now, and neither of his parents have spoken to him. In fact, the only one who has is the waitress, and they didn't have an actual conversation. She was just doing her job. "Yeah," is all he manages to say. A moment passes when they don't say anything else. Izuku thinks maybe his father finally gave on trying to talk to him, but he's proven wrong a few seconds later. "I know you don't like me," he says, and Izuku almost laughs because, yes, isn't it obvious? "And honestly, I don't like you much either," he whispers. Izuku frowns. Although he hadn't been trying to hide the way he felt about the man, he hadn't thought this would be mutual, and it takes him by surprise. "I didn't come back for you," he continues, "though I did think that quirk of yours would make you less annoying." He sighs. "So let's just keep it that way. I don't like you, you don't like me, no big deal. But now, you listen to me, because I'm the one in control of the situation, and you're not." His mother comes back, and Izuku blinks. His father, God, he wishes he wouldn't be related to this man, just smiles at him, and Izuku's mother mirrors his smile, thinking they just had a nice talk. "I'm glad you two are getting along," she says, and Izuku swallows. He doesn't look away from the man, even though the other has already broken the eye contact. He can't say anything about their interaction. Not while his father is still there. "Mom," he says, finally tearing his gaze away, "are we leaving soon?" She nods. "Yes, I'm starting to feel tired as well." She reaches for his hand and gives it a light squeeze. His father stops their waitress as she's walking past them and asks for the bill. She comes back a few minutes later with a paper in hand. They all get up and gather their things before heading for the cashier near the entrance. Izuku watches as his father reaches for something in the pocket of his coat. The other, and then looks in the pockets of his jeans. "I think I forgot my wallet." His mother puts her hand on his forearm, stopping him from emptying the content of his overcoat. "It's all right, I'll pay for it." She pulls one of the straps of her purse to open it and takes out her own bright green wallet. While her back is turned, Izuku sees the corner of his father's mouth tugging up slightly. It's gone a split second later, but he's sure it wasn't his eyes playing tricks on him. It's at this exact moment he realizes just how bad the return of his father actually is. Izuku knows he has to do something about it, but he doesn't know what. Eventually, they make it back to the apartment. The man heads for the bathroom right away. Once the door is closed, Izuku turns to his mother. "Can we talk?" he asks. Her eyes soften. Of course, she leans towards him. "Don't you want to go into the living room?" They're still in the entryway, but it's the furthest place from the bathroom, so Izuku shakes his head. "No, here is fine." He looks down. It's about him. He still hasn't decided on what to call his father. "Baby, we talked about this yesterday." "And no, it's not. It happened at the restaurant." He stumbles over his words. "He told me that he didn't like me, and then when we were paying..." "Izuku," she warns, and he snaps his mouth shut. Do you think I love you less because your father is back home?" "What? No, that's not." She takes his wrists in her hands gently. "Izuku, I love you so much, and nothing could ever change that. But that doesn't mean you can say those things about your father." "Mom, listen to me." A door cracks open, and they both turn at the same time to look at the man coming out of the bathroom, staring at them. His mother is the first to look away and then head for the kitchen. Izuku stands there a few seconds longer before going in his room, walking past his father. Right before he opens his door, he hears the man talk in a hushed voice. "I'll go talk to him." Izuku wants to lock himself in his room before his father has a chance to enter the doorframe. But of course, he doesn't do that. Instead, he doesn't bother closing the door all the way. He sits on his bed and takes his phone out, pretending to be busy. It doesn't take long before Izuku hears a light knock. And then the door opens under the beat. The dark-haired man's eyebrows crease slightly and he smiles as he closes the door behind him. Izuku closes his phone and watches his reflection on the darkened screen. "Why did you come back?" The question seems to take the older man by surprise. For a moment he stands there, unmoving. "You've told your mother about our discussion," he answers instead, ignoring Izuku's question. It's a fact, not a question he's supposed to reply to. He hates the way his father speaks, as if Izuku were still just a small child who needed to be explained to simplest things. "She won't believe you." Izuku purses his lips. "She'll realize something's wrong." He scoffs, creeping closer to where the teen sits. "Izuku." He crouches down right in front of him, taking both his wrists gently in his palms, something his mother does when she tries to comfort him. But right now he only wants to pull away. I don't think I've been clear enough. I won't listen to you, Izuku says. You're in no position to decide that here, the man replies, tightening his grip on his son's wrist until it becomes uncomfortable. Who do you think is paying for that fancy school of yours? Izuku feels the blood drain from his face. No, his mother had taken care of that. She'd told him so. Unless maybe she had meant his father had. That's right, I've put you in that school, he whispers, and it'll be just as easy to take you out of it. Izuku tries to tug on his arms to take them out of his father's harsh grip, but the man only tightens his hold in return. You can't do that, he breathes out weakly. There's something terrifying behind those green eyes so similar to his. Izuku analyzes those freckled cheeks, pointing out in his head how they're different from his, placed differently, searching for any indication that there must be a mistake somehow. That he's not related to this person crouched in front of him, the one that's clinging onto his forearms with so much pressure it's sure to bruise. Believe me, I can. Izuku flinches slightly, and it seems that's all it takes for his father to finally let go of him. Well, that wasn't so hard. We should do this more often. The man stands up and walks up to the door. You know what? I'm in a good mood. He turns around to face Izuku. Just call me Dad, he smirks. Right when he's about to turn the handle, he stops in his track. Though, and I expect you'll be able to keep our little conversation between us, right? Yes, Izuku says barely above a whisper. The man looks at him expectantly. Yes, Dad. A beep echoes from the scanner at UAS main entrance. Izuku lets out a breath, either from the cold or because he's glad to finally be back here. He'd managed to find an excuse to leave his house early on Sunday morning, being unable to bear the other man's presence anymore. Bluish bruises had bloomed on his wrists in the shape of handprints, just as he had feared it would. He kept tugging on his sleeves to cover them, even though no one was around outside. Izuku knows this just makes it even more obvious he's trying to hide something, and that his friends probably wouldn't even notice them if he would simply leave them alone. He knows it's his fault, in a way. If he'd just listened from the beginning, maybe he could have had a better relationship with his father, or at least pretend. It's not a big deal, anyway. His hands just feel a little sore, but he reassures himself they will heal soon. He's had worse injuries, so how can he hope to call himself a hero if he can't handle a small pain? Izuku hopes the common room and the comfort of his friends will make him feel better. The air is wet, and the sky is gray. Izuku has to avoid stepping into puddles of water scattered across the path leading to Heights Alliance. Class 1A's building finally comes into view, and Izuku hurries up the steps, as if maybe once he were inside everything else would go away. He'd be safe. He pushes the door open and a few heads turn his way. Some people seem surprised to see him, understandably so. Izuku had told them he wouldn't be back until later today, and the sun has barely just risen. Shiro and Kirishima are the first to greet him, looking away from the game they're playing on the television. A few of his classmates are sitting at one of the tables, playing board games. Mina is slumped in her chair, looking defeated. Oh my god, that's so unfair. MahouMou, give us a chance. She sighs. I'm sorry. Yaoyorozu answers, her face turning red. I'm really trying to limit myself. What? You mean you're not even trying? Hagakure lets her head fall forward between her crossed arm on the table. Yaoyorozu notices him and waves at him, happy to be able to divert attention away from her. His friends sitting at the table turn to Izuku to say hello, alerting everyone else in the room of his presence. Midoriya, you came back earlier, Ida says, doing the chopping motion with his arms he always does. Izuku nods. Kaminari turns to face him from his place on the couch, placing his elbows on the side of the couch. How was dinner with your parents? For a moment, Izuku thinks they know his father came back home this weekend. He doesn't know how they know, but surely they must have learned it somewhere. Had his father something to do with it? You idiot. Deku lives with his mom, Katsuki says. Oh, Izuku had just forgotten to tell them this detail. But now it's awkward and he doesn't want to explain that. Unfortunately, it is not just him and his mother anymore. Right, sorry about that. Kaminari replies. Izuku shakes his hands in front of him. It's no worries. It was nice. He lingers in his spot, not really knowing what to do. Everyone goes back to their activities and Izuku takes it as his cue to finally get moving. He feels eyes burning holes in his back, and when he turns his head around, he sees Katsuki staring at him. He snaps his gaze away and instinctively pulls at his sleeves before going up to his room. He hates this. Izuku had thought once he'd been here that he would be able to forget the events of the day before. He'd been wrong. The worst thing is there's a holiday coming up soon, one he'd been really excited about. But now, he's not so sure anymore. Izuku would rather stay in this very room, in the comfort of the walls surrounding him, where he's able to pretend even for just a moment what's happening to him isn't real, or that at least it's something that will be over soon. It feels like when he's in ectoplasm's mathematics class, and he doesn't know how to solve a problem. In those moments, Izuku wants to drop his pen and give up. But he tries anyway because, in the end, it won't matter whether he can solve the equation or not. The class will eventually come to an end, and everything will be all right. Except, this is not a class. He can't exit the room or ask for the answer. Izuku is stuck with this problem with no indication of where to start looking. Maybe if he closes his eyes really hard, he can imagine he's sitting at his desk, and that he only has to focus on finding the answer. He knows this doesn't erase his problem completely. It's nice to pretend it does, though. Izuku's wrists don't feel any better the next morning. On the contrary, the bruises had darkened, turned a different shade of blue, mixed with purple and yellow around the edge, and he's scared someone might see them. It's stupid, because he's had broken arms and legs before, but he had never actually tried to hide an injury, not to his classmates at least. When his father had been holding his wrists, Izuku hadn't been paying much attention to how painful it felt, but now it's hard to ignore. He does his best to resist the urge to tug on his sleeves because doing so would only bring the attention of others to this particular spot. Not that he is certain that it would, but he doesn't want to take any chance. Still, he catches himself holding on to the ends of his sleeves on multiple occasions. Taking notes is harder than Izuku had anticipated. The small ache he feels when his arms hang on his side is something he can ignore, but the pain becomes much more noticeable when he has to actually move his wrist. At some point during the lesson, he feels a sting in his eyes, and tears start to well up. In class, he has to stop writing every few minutes to let his hands rest. Izuku is always looking around, searching for someone that could see him, but no one is ever looking at him, so he guesses he's doing a good job so far. He's been on edge about every little thing ever since his father came back, jumping when a pencil hit the floor, or when someone would raise their hand too fast. Izuku doesn't know when it starts, but at some point during the day, he feels someone watching him, and that someone is Kaken. Of course, he would be the one to notice something wasn't right with him. Katsuki had always been like this, noticing every little detail. He's amazing, and Izuku wishes he wasn't, just this once. It shouldn't surprise Izuku. In fact, he should have seen it coming. But still, he's pretty sure Katsuki hasn't noticed the bruises on his wrists yet, so he just has to be more careful for now. The days go by and slowly Izuku becomes more confident no one will notice until it heals. He feels relieved, and for some reason a small pinch of hurt, too. Maybe a part of him does wish his friends would notice, even though it defeats the whole purpose of what he's doing. One time, he finds himself wondering if he would notice such injuries on his friends if they had them. Maybe they do. But Izuku has been so focused on himself that he hasn't taken the time to pay attention to his friends at all. He starts to feel so selfish, and now he looks closely at every small detail concerning the people around him. So much that he stops worrying about hiding his own. And this is his first mistake, he realizes, when he walks into the hallway after class. Suddenly, someone grabs his arm and drags him to an empty dead end. His back hits the wall, but the hand keeping him there doesn't put more pressure than necessary to keep him in place. When Izuku lifts his eyes up, his emerald eyes meet ruby ones. "The hell's wrong with you?" Katsuki asks. For a second, Izuku is too startled to say anything, unable to form words. Kaken, he tries to pry the blonde's hand away, but to no avail. What? You've been acting all weird and shit this week. Acting like a kicked puppy. I don't know what you're talking about, he answers under his breath, holding the other's gaze. Oh yeah, Katsuki says, taking Izuku's arm and lifting it in front of his face, the fabric falling slightly, just enough for the marks to become visible. Then what the fuck are these? The green-haired teen can't help but wince, they're just from training. Well, maybe he hadn't been doing as much of a great job at acting normally as he had thought. He tries to pull away again, but this time Katsuki holds him in place with even more force. You think I'm dumb enough to believe a lie like that? He asks angrily. But Izuku thinks he's able to discern worry hidden behind his voice. Izuku takes a moment to look at Katsuki. He notices for the first time the way his arms tremble, and how wide his eyes are, but the creases around them are different from when he's angry. He lets Izuku's arm go but keeps his hand on his chest in place, as if scared he might run away the moment Katsuki gave him the chance to. And maybe he would. Of course, Izuku is upset to have been found out so quickly. But really, what had he been expecting? Nothing goes his way recently. Why would now be any different? It's nothing, he mumbles before finally managing to get Katsuki's arm off of him. A beat of silence passes between the two as Izuku rubs the section around the bruises on his wrists, but Katsuki doesn't let go of him yet, though his hold falters a bit a second later. His eyebrows furrow a bit. He looks young and scared. Did Auntie do this? No, she would never. Then who? Katsuki sounds so desperate. Izuku feels a twinge of guilt in his heart for having to keep this from him. Who is it? I can't tell you, he doesn't. Hey, realizing his mistake, Izuku stops talking. Oh no, he thinks, I've already said too much. He tries to push Katsuki off of him again, but the blonde puts his forearm on him with enough force that Izuku can't pull him off without hurting him or needing to use his quirk. His back hits the wall again, and Izuku stops trying to get out of his grip. The hallways have already emptied themselves from the last students lingering in them. classes have ended for the day a few minutes ago, but still, it's a wonder how no one has heard them talking yet. Deku, Katsuki starts again, but this time there's some kind of urgency in his voice, lacking the malice from when he's angry, which he often is. You need help. The way he says it makes something in Izuku's stomach twist. I don't need you to save me, he shouts. Fuck you, his childhood friend snarls, visibly hurt by Izuku's word, although he tries to hide it. If you don't let me, I'll tell Aizawa. The smaller of the two is about to argue when someone cuts him off. Tell me what? Both students snap their heads to the side at the sound of their teacher's voice. Izuku stands there, dread settling in his stomach, wondering just how much of their conversation Aizawa has heard so far. The pro hero stares back at them expectantly. Well, Katsuki clicks his tongue. He gives Izuku a side glance before looking at the ground. It's nothing. Izuku does the same, grateful the blonde has chosen not to expose him, at least not yet. It's strange, he thinks, that he had wanted people to take notice of him. And now that someone finally has, he wants nothing but to get rid of this unwanted attention. He wants to have a miniature version of himself that he can hide away somewhere no one will ever bother to look. Midoriya, Aizawa says, breaking him out of his thought. Izuku blinks. Why yeah, it's fine, and it's true, it has to be, somehow. Because Izuku doesn't need anyone to save him, simply because there is nothing to be saved from. All of it is fine, he is fine. Maybe this is it. Maybe he'd been faking it this entire time, just for the attention. His skittish behavior, his wanting to be left alone, all of it. He kind of feels like he's back in junior high, constantly on guard, but never completely there. Izuku gets so lost in his head that he doesn't realize how much time passes. And when he turns his head up to look at his teacher, he sees a frown beginning to form on his face. I should go. He pushes past Katsuki. And the blonde lets him, maybe because their teacher is there, or because he knows he can't convince Izuku. Right when he's about to go past the hero, a hand shoots up, keeping him from walking away. Aizawa grabs Izuku's arm, and even though the grip is gentle, it still makes him tense up. Can't people just leave him alone today? Problem child. The man says, what's all this about? He asks in a careful manner, obviously trying not to upset him, but Izuku shakes his head. It's nothing, he says weakly. And Aizawa must see something in his eyes, or feel how Izuku tugs slightly on his arm to take it back without meaning to, because he lets go. The teen gives Katsuki one last look, taking in the way his eyes plead silently to him to say something, anything at all. But Izuku only walks away. The next day during homeroom, quiet raindrops hit the window next to where Izuku sits in class. He absently listens to the lesson Aizawa is giving, not daring to look at his teacher's face since their last interaction. He knows he should try a little harder to act more engaged in class, like his usual self, normal. But the truth is that Izuku has always been a terrible liar. Ever since he was little, his heart would become overwhelmed with guilt if he was tasked with keeping a secret, or hiding something, even the littlest things. But then the bullying had begun to worsen over time, and he got better at lying to his mother about the scrapes he'd get on his knees after being pushed down. He got better at putting on a happy face and using a cheerful tone when greeting her at the door after school. But no matter how good he got at hiding his true feelings, he still had a terrible time handling the culpability he felt after lying to her. His mother had been the only person in his life at the time, and somehow it had made things easier. Not all things, but some. Having to hide something pressing so heavily on his heart from his many friends was a completely different thing. Not only that, Aizawa had started eyeing him recently, too. Get yourself together, Izuku keeps telling himself, finally turning his head to look at the front of the class. He notices his teacher had started writing down important information on the blackboard that would surely be on their test. Quickly, too quickly, Izuku reaches for his pencil, dropping it just as fast and twisting his wrist from the rapid movement. A small gasp escapes his lips from the sharp pain, and he squeezes his eyes shut when he sees the pen rolling off his desk. The piece of wood hits the floor with a thud, and a few heads turn in his direction. Embarrassed, Izuku crouches down to pick it up while holding the side of his desk to keep himself from falling. He's careful not to do any sudden movement that could upset his sore wrists. And that's all it is. Or it would be, if not for the side look Katsuki gives him a moment after everyone's already turned back to taking their notes, or the way Aizawa interrupts his lesson for a split second before finishing his sentence. It's only morning, but Izuku already dreads the end of the day, because that's when they'll all be going home. His leg bounces anxiously as he thinks about what he's going to do. He can't stay here, even though he really wants to. It would bring too much attention to himself, seeing as he's usually very enthusiastic at the idea of going home to see his mother. Everything is kind of confusing to Izuku. He knows something is definitely wrong with his father, but his mother loves him, and that's a good thing. Is he the problem in this? He wants to believe he isn't, but ruling out this option completely sounds like something a person who's actually the problem would do, so he doesn't. He's vaguely aware of his surroundings for the rest of the day. Sometimes, he loses himself in his thoughts and misses the worried glances his classmates throw at him. Izuku would rather live another day being his middle school self instead of having to deal with this situation. He would rather go back to when it was just him and his mother, to the time when no matter what happened, he could go back home at the end of the day and feel safe. Before anyone had had the chance to do so much as blink, the week was over. It had come and gone surprisingly fast. And slow, too. It's like watching the arrows on a clock move for an entire minute. It's long and boring, but after the time is up, somehow all the seconds are gone, and it's a mystery where to. Sitting on the common room's couch, Izuku wishes he would have more time to prepare himself mentally, even though he's already had a week to do that. Madabro, don't you need to pack your things? Kirishima asks, dropping his heavy bag next to the door. Izuku knows the question is meant more as a reminder that he should hurry a bit, but the way everyone quiets down to hear his answer tells him they're probably curious and maybe concerned, too. Oh, I have time, he replies. My train is passing later. It's true, at least partially. His train actually passes in 20 minutes, but there's another one an hour after that. Before the dorm system, Izuku would sometimes take the train back home with some of his other classmates. If they find it weird he doesn't join them, well, they stay quiet about it. Izuku stares up at the clock on the wall across from him. He counts how many minutes he has left before he'll be home. His breath catches in his throat because there are not enough for comfort. He does some breathing exercises, but they barely do anything to help. Most people have left by now, and only a few are left, but they're all in their rooms. Izuku is alone in the common room until he isn't. The main door opens, and he assumes it's just one of his classmates who has forgotten something. The soft footsteps come to a stop, and then a sigh escapes the other person's mouth. Problem child. Izuku turns his head, recognizing his teacher's voice, who, for some reason, seems to be everywhere the teen doesn't want him to be. Aizawa-sensei, you haven't packed your things. It's more of a statement, an observation, than a question. Izuku gets up abruptly. I was just about to. The man lifts his hand up, stopping whatever Izuku was going to say. The pro-hero motions for him to sit back down, and so he does. He doesn't take his eyes off his teacher as he watches Aizawa going to sit on the couch, leaving a fair distance between them. A silence falls over them. It is neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, it simply is. Izuku wonders if his teacher is waiting on him to say something. But before he can think of something to say, the man speaks up. Is everything all right at home? It's straight to the point and blunt. Izuku is taken aback a little, and it takes him a moment to register the question he's being asked. Why, yeah, he utters out. Aizawa waits some more, looking at him with a calm face and a worried frown. Are you sure? Izuku actually takes the time to think about it. Well, it's not all right for now, but he's sure it will be eventually. Yes, he answers, but it sounds more like he's trying to convince himself than anything else. The man has his elbows propped on his knees, his fingers intertwined between each other. He seems to be thinking for a moment, lost in thought. He places his chin on top of his hands. There's nothing wrong with asking for help, he says, drawing out the words slowly, looking ahead of him. Izuku doesn't know what to answer to that, and he doesn't think Aizawa is expecting him to say anything. That's the first thing you learn when you become a hero. It makes sense. After all, being a hero is all about helping others, but Izuku is doing just fine on his own at the moment. He doesn't understand why people keep trying to help him, even though there's nothing to be done. I don't need help. I know, Aizawa says, as if he really did, sliding his index over his mouth in thought, and then leaving it to rest on his chin before reaching for something in his pocket. I won't push you to tell me anything, but if you ever do want some help, I'll be here. He takes out a small, folded piece of paper and hands it out to the green-haired teen. Hesitantly, Izuku takes it, not really knowing what to do with it. The pro-hero gets up without another word, only glancing back once to the student, who hasn't moved an inch, before leaving the building. Izuku sits there, on the couch that reminds him so much of the one he bought with his mother a few years back, and stares at the clock again. Individually, seconds are swift, but when there are a lot of them, they are steadier. At that moment, Izuku wishes there were more seconds inside every minute, every hour. But there aren't, and so he rises to his feet, packs his bag again, and leaves. Izuku ends up almost missing the last train home for the night, but he makes it right before the automatic doors close. It's almost empty, except for an elderly woman asleep on one of the plastic chairs embedded in the floor, and a younger man standing up, looking at his phone with a bored expression. Neither of them pays much attention to him, except for when they catch a glimpse at him when he slumps down in the seat closest to the door in which he entered. There's an odd comfort in finally being on the train, as if now he wouldn't be to blame for what happened next, because there was already no going back. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. He recalls Aizawa's words from earlier. There's no way Izuku will do that. His father had told him if he did, he would pull him out of UA. He tries to reassure himself it's better this way, that the holiday only lasts about a week, and he'll be back to school next Wednesday. Time moves, always. It's the one thing that's reliable in life. That means there is no other outcome possible other than for this so-called vacation to come to an end eventually. Izuku takes out the piece of paper Aizawa had given him. With it sticking to his thumb along with its yellowish tint, he assumes it's a post-it. He unfolds it, and it takes a moment for his brain to catch up with what's written on the note, probably because of how tired he is. It's a phone number, and just above it reads, Aizawa Shouta. It's written in blue ink, in a rushed but neat handwriting. For some reason, Izuku finds himself unable to tear his eyes away from it. Tears gather in the corner of his eyes, and he doesn't know why. Stop crying, damn it, he scolds himself, wiping his tears away before they have a chance to fall. He hates how fast everything fell apart. Well, he still has his friends, but they're all in UA, and if his father is threatening to take his school away from him, then he's also taking everything that goes with it, and that terrifies Izuku. His mother is happy, and he reminds himself that this is all that matters. Izuku can't be mad at her. If anything, she should have been angry at him for taking away her husband all those years ago because of his quirklessness. But she hasn't, and so he owes her the same. For now, things aren't so bad. All he can do is live with the situation, accept it, and hope that it won't get worse. The wind flows in Izuku's hair gently as he stands still in front of the apartment door. It's dark now, but he barely notices the dazzling glimmer of the stars. He had seen his mother's frantic texts from earlier, asking him where he was, that it was getting late, but he had only sent a quick reply telling her he would be there later. He clenches and unclenches his fist, attempting to will himself to reach for the handle. He counts to 3 in his head for the umpteenth time, but then nothing happens. His body stays still. It's not that hard, he knows, but right now it is. Izuku considers walking away, going someplace where he won't have to worry about a thing. But then, he hears noises coming from inside the place. Or maybe they'd been there for a while, but Izuku had been too lost in his head to notice. It seems so out of place in the quiet night, disturbing, even. It makes his stomach churn. With a trembling hand, he reaches for the doorknob. His fingers linger on the cool metal for a second more, and then he turns it slowly. He cracks the door open, just enough to hear the loud whispers of his parents, arguing back and forth, or at least it sounds like that's what they're doing. Izuku feels as though he's intruding on something, and he is, obviously, but he can't back down now. He doesn't want to startle them, so he decides to announce his presence casually, like he would on any other day. Izuku swings the door open. He stops dead in his tracks. His parents are there, at the end of the hallway, standing right in between the living room and the kitchen. Both their heads snap to look at Izuku, surprised looks on their faces. The area around his mother's eyes is wet and puffy, and there are red lines on her cheeks. His father looks more upset than anything, but his mouth is still open as if he were about to say something, but didn't. Home. His mother is the first to turn away from him, quickly wiping her eyes. His father puts on a smile, one that doesn't quite reach his eyes. Izuku, what's going on? The boy asks in a small voice. He'd imagined 1,000 different scenarios of how tonight would go, but none had gone like this. His emerald irises keep flickering between the two adults in the room, waiting for them to say something. Your mother's a little tired, is all, the man answers. Izuku frowns slightly, because there's no way that's all there is to it. His father turns to the woman whose shoulders are bouncing a bit and puts his palm on her upper back in a tender way. His mother's neck and shoulder stiffen, but he doesn't take his hand off. Izuku should do something, anything at all, but his body freezes up completely. He tries to form words, parting his lips open, but no sound comes out. Don't touch her, he mutters, weakly, like he had spoken something he had meant to keep to himself, but the thought had escaped his mouth. Izuku lifts his gaze up to meet his father's, as if telling the man that he does mean his words. But of course, the older man doesn't move. Izuku's mother shakes her head, turning away from him even more until she's back to him, trying to suppress her cries. His father whispers something in her ear, and she nods vaguely in response. His mother straightens up and turns to face Izuku again. She opens her mouth to say something, but her confidence seems to falter at the sight of him. She blinks and her gaze falls to the ground. I'm sorry, she whispers, and Izuku almost misses it. His father slides his hand on her shoulder, and she heads for her room, closing the door softly behind her. Izuku blinks, lost and confused as to what had just happened. He's still standing in the entryway, holding the door open with his right hand, leaving plenty of space for the wind to come inside. The room is cold, but he ignores the goosebumps forming on his forearms. Izuku, the man says again, casually, as though nothing had happened, close the door, will you? It's freezing outside. The teen remains in his place for a second more, gripping the side of the door a little harder until a small bit of white paint falls off. He wants to say something, but he also doesn't want to upset the man, so he stays quiet and does as he's told. His father walks out of view into the kitchen. Izuku struggles, hopping on one foot to take off his shoe while he lets his backpack and bag fall on the floor. He hurries after the man but then stops abruptly. There are a few beers sitting on the table, empty, and another one in the man's hand. Now that the door is closed, an intoxicating scent fills the place, making Izuku's face sour. The room feels so different from the one he'd known his entire life, tense and cramped where it was supposed to be pleasant and cozy. Midoriya and Ko had never been much of a drinker. In fact, Izuku had never really seen her drink anything at all. They've always been short on cash ever since he can remember. But his mother would prioritize their basic needs and save the rest. He's not sure whether she doesn't drink because she doesn't like the taste of alcohol, or because she simply never had the money to. Seeing the table there, with all those bottles sitting on top of it, sparks a strange feeling inside of him, one Izuku isn't familiar with. It's a mix between worry and fear, unease, none of them are quite right to describe it. Izuku watches the movements of his father, a bit more sluggish than usual. He already hates being alone with the man. Being alone with the man while he's drunk sounds even worse. You're just gonna stare. His father sneers. The teen's eyes snap up to meet the man's. No, He licks his lips. What happened with Mom? He asks tentatively. Nothing, that woman's always crying. No, she's not. Izuku tries to defend her. His father sighs. You talk way too fucking much. He pinches the bridge of his nose, his lower back resting against the counter. He takes a sip of his drink and then, as if an idea had just crossed his mind, gestured at Izuku with the hand still holding the beer. You know, I think this could be good for you. It takes him a few seconds to understand what the man means. He's offering me a drink, he realizes. His eyes widen and he shakes his head. Oh no, I'm good, he stutters. The black-haired man clicks his head and moves towards Izuku. Come on, you can't be a real man till you had your first beer. No, really, I'm fine. The boy takes a step back, and then another until his legs hit the back of the sofa. His father hands out the bottle to him. Take it. Izuku shakes his head. Annoyed, the man grabs his upper arm harshly and holds the bottle up to the younger's lips. The teen keeps his mouth, even though the cold glass is starting to hurt from being pressed against his lips. This seems to irritate the man even further. He lets go of his arm and instead moves his hand to cover Izuku's nose, blocking his respiratory tracts. The boy starts to struggle and panic, trying to push away the man, but he's much taller than him, and somehow every self-defense technique Izuku has learned so far this year just completely slips his mind. He doesn't think about using his quirk, doesn't reason with himself. The only thing he can think about is getting out of there. He grabs onto the man's hand on his face, but it doesn't budge. It doesn't help that his own wrists are still a bit sore. At some point, Izuku needs air, so he opens his mouth. He doesn't have time to breathe. The liquid is already entering his mouth and he almost chokes. He ends up swallowing it, fearing he'll actually choke if he doesn't. It doesn't taste good at all. It's sour and tastes faintly of oranges. He holds onto the wrist of the hand holding the drink, tries to shrink away from it, but his father just presses harder. The yellowish drink had been almost full a few seconds ago, and now there's almost nothing left of it. It feels as though it'll never end. Tears start to gather in the corner of his eyes. Maybe this is how he dies. Izuku should have taken the drink, should have taken a sip and then given it back to the man. This could have been easily avoided, but here goes, messing things up again and getting himself in trouble. Eventually, though, it does end. The man removes the glass and steps back, giving the boy one last little shove that almost sends him to the floor. Izuku coughs and gasps for air, finally letting the drops of salty water roll down his cheek. His throat burns and his head spins. His mouth starts to water, and then he feels nauseous. Izuku pushes himself off the couch and hurries to the bathroom, barely making it on time before he empties his stomach's content. He throws up for what feels like hours, when in reality it's only just a few minutes. The toilet seat is cool against his cheek. He can make out the figure of his father standing in the doorway, looking down at him with revulsion. Disgusting, the man says before leaving. And yeah, it is. Izuku is. He weakly reaches for the handle to flush the toilet before getting up to stand. How stupid did he have to be to even think for a second this could go well? Right now, he doesn't even care about what just happened. He only thinks about the comfort of his bed, the one in his dorm. But Izuku isn't in his dorm now. He's at home, and he wants to leave. Izuku doesn't get much sleep that night. He churns and turns on the squeaky mattress, feeling sick, but there's nothing left in his stomach for him to throw up. He's hungry and incredibly thirsty too, but he doesn't know if his father is still in the kitchen, so he stays in bed, bored. It's 1 a.m. and he thinks he could study instead of doing nothing at all, but he forgot his backpack at the door and his legs refuse to take him anywhere. Then it's 3 a.m. and the man is probably off to sleep by now, but a thought at the back of his head reminds him maybe he isn't, so Izuku stays put. He stares at the clock on his bedside table. The red light coming from the numbers is hypnotizing, and although it becomes plain after a while, there isn't much else to stare at in the deserted room. Izuku wonders why there are 10 digits. Why not more? Why not less? He wonders if there is an end to numbers, and if he will reach it eventually if he continues watching every second go by. Is infinity a myth? Everything must have an end, so surely it must be. Or else, what would be the point of it all? At one point, Izuku has been tired for a little too long, and he doesn't feel like sleeping anymore. He sits up and presses the palm of his hands against his eyes, stays like this for a few moments longer, and then walks up to his door. He presses his ear against it, searching for any indication someone might be up at this hour, and though it is unlikely, Izuku won't take any chances. Better be safe than sorry. Once he's sure the other side is clear, he opens the door. He heads for the kitchen and grimaces when a bitter smell reaches his nostrils. He's reminded of the night before, and it's enough to make him feel sick again. Izuku silently promises himself to never drink again. He opens the pantry and skims over everything very quickly to see if there's anything that he wants to eat, but he finds nothing. Izuku knows he shouldn't be difficult, but it feels as though everything would taste like sand in his mouth. Still, he grabs a cereal box and eats it in his hands, not bothering to take out a bowl and put some milk in it, and he makes himself a glass of water. The place is silent, disturbingly so. He'd like to leave, but the place doesn't feel like home, doesn't feel familiar, so it'd be strange to just leave like that. It's a stupid thought. He's lived here his entire life, but even this knowledge doesn't shake the feeling away. He ends up grabbing his shoes quickly anyway and heading out for a morning run. The breeze is cool against his cheeks, and he's forgotten to grab his jacket on his way out, but it doesn't matter now. He runs. He runs away from this house that doesn't feel like his, from his father who he wishes would have stayed away. He runs. Izuku forgets about his worry and instead concentrates on where to step and which way to go next. He takes note of every little crack on the pavement, amusing himself with trying not to touch them and failing. He breathes. He doesn't stop running even when his chest starts aching. Sweat begins to soak through his clothes, and his head spins, black dots filling his vision. It doesn't matter whether he wants to keep going or not. Izuku trips. His knees hit the cold concrete before his hands do. It doesn't hurt at first, but it stings a bit. He sits down with a wince, breathing heavily. He watches the blood start to trickle down his legs, and the little rocks that got stuck in the wounds that are now painted in crimson. Izuku's hands aren't any better. They are pale due to the small layer of dust on them, with tiny scrapes in different spots. So much for wanting to go on a run. Now he feels like a child who just fell down his bicycle, or what he thinks it must feel like. Izuku has never been on a bicycle before, and so he gets up, a little awkwardly, but he manages to stand on his feet. His right leg had taken the worst hit, but thankfully no one roams around this part of the neighborhood at this time of the day to see him limp. By the time he's climbing back up the stairs leading to his apartment, the sun is already starting to rise. Izuku opens the door without much hesitation this time. He knows he has to clean his small injuries before they get infected. Izuku goes to the sink, drinking some more water from the same glass he'd used earlier. After that, he takes out a white cloth covered with a pattern of blue flowers and holds it under the running water. The first aid kit is further down the corridor, and Izuku doesn't think it's worth taking the risk of waking up his parents. Water will have to do for now. His parents, he thinks as he presses down the wet cloth against his bloodied knee, holding back a wince. It's still weird, after a week of trying to get used to the idea that he's not just him and his mother anymore. It's Izuku and his mother and his father, which is honestly a little too long. He could do without the last part. He tries to angle himself in a better position to wash away the bits of rocks mixed up with blood, putting his foot up on the counter, right by the sink, and then on the ground again when he loses his balance. Taking a white cloth might not have been such a good idea after all, because now it's not white anymore. He wonders if it's still wet because of the water, or because of all the blood seeping through the tissue. Maybe it's both. Oh well, that's a problem he'll deal with later. Izuku decides to sit on the cold tiles for a minute. His wrists still look the same, unfortunately, and they are still sore, but he hadn't really noticed until now, his mind preoccupied elsewhere. He's starting to have a collection of these kinds of injuries, ones he gets when he goes back home. He moves a bit, and something under him rustles. Izuku thinks for a moment maybe he sat on some paper that had been laying on the ground. But when he looks, there's nothing. He searches in his back pocket until his hand comes in contact with something. It's the post-it Aizawa had given him yesterday. Izuku stares at it, wondering why he hasn't thrown it away yet. It's not like he's actually going to call him. What would he tell his teacher anyway? Hey, I don't really want to be here. And then what? Well, things have already gone terribly so far, and he still has 5 entire days to go, including this one. So, Izuku makes a promise to himself. He'll hang on to this paper, keep it close to him, and if things get worse, he'll call Aizawa. If Izuku were to be asked who he would rather not see on this sunny set, people would probably expect him to answer Shigaraki or anyone related to the League of Villains. In reality, he dreads the second his father will wake up. He doesn't know why he stays in the kitchen, sitting at the table and reading through hero blogs mindlessly. Doing so just means he has more chance of seeing the man early on. He tries to convince himself that seeing his father is a much better scenario than running into a villain. But he can't get himself to believe his own lie. And plus, a villain with a hero for a son doesn't seem very convincing. No, his father is not a villain. He's just a man with different, and, in Izuku's opinion, morally wrong ideas and views on the world. Before his thoughts have a chance to spiral further down, a door opens further down the corridor, and although a voice in his head tells him not to look, he still does. The heavy footsteps tapping against the wooden floor aren't familiar, which makes it pretty easy to identify who they belong to. Surely enough, instead of seeing his mother's cheerful attitude and soft expression, he is met with his father's judging eyes. Or maybe he's just imagining it, because the second after Izuku blinks, the man is smiling and walking past him to the door, taking the teen a bit off guard. Without thinking about it, Izuku pushes his chair back slightly and half sits up. Where are you going? For a moment he thinks he's going to get yelled at, or that his father will stop putting on his shoes to come hit him. But instead, he doesn't even turn to him. He just says, I'm going out to buy some things. Tell your mother I'll be back later. And this is it. Nothing happens, and it only confuses Izuku more. It's frustrating, not being able to predict his father's next move, if he'll be angry or joyful. His face is hard to read, too. But maybe this is because he hasn't spent enough time with the man. Not that Izuku would want him to stay long enough to be able to get to know him. He sits back down, a little stunned, having expected more and instead left with nothing at all. He watches the empty bottles he'd been trying to ignore sitting on the table. One of them is knocked over, and he has the urge to put it back up. But he doesn't know if his father will be angry if he comes back and not everything is as it was. It's so stupid, but he does it anyway. He reaches for the cold bottle and places it in a standing position, as if this was a big rebellion act. It's not like his father told him not to touch anything, but somehow the possibility that the man might get mad at him for it only made him more determined. It means his father doesn't have control over Izuku. Not completely, and it gives him hope. Suddenly, he hears a door crack open followed by soft footsteps muffled by slippers. He knows right away who is it. Who else could it be? His mother doesn't notice him right away, yawning when she enters the kitchen. She blinks and then her gaze falls on Izuku. The dark circles under her eyes are striking, and she startles when she sees him. She quickly relaxes, passing a hand over her face with a sigh. Izuku, I didn't know you were up. She must have just woken up, probably because of his father, either when he got out of bed or when he closed the door. He nods, unsure what to say. He's been meaning to talk to his mother for a while now, but last time didn't go well, and the day before didn't seem like the right time. He wonders if she'll listen to him if he tries again. She starts picking up the beers and stays quiet, her mind elsewhere. 1, 2 bottles, and then the one Izuku had taken the time to place upright. It makes his heart sting a bit, but he shakes his head. It's just one stupid bottle. He starts helping her, and she doesn't even bother washing the bottles or at least rinsing them first before dropping them in the recycling bin with a cling. It's unusual for his mother. Usually she would always take the time to clean recyclable materials before throwing them away. Hesitantly, Izuku does the same. And when he looks into the bin, he sees, well, paper and a couple of other things, but mainly just more bottles, all piled up on top of each other. He had thought the ones laying on the table had been the accumulation of the time he had spent back at UA, but clearly that couldn't be true because he had just found more. Mom, his voice is soft, and he tries to hide the nervousness behind it. Has this been going on all week? She turns the knobs on the sink, letting the water run, and picks up the sponge to wash the dishes. Izuku stands there awkwardly, wondering if she didn't hear him or if she's just ignoring his question, and if he should leave. No, she says, surprising him, though she doesn't sound convinced by her answer. I mean, yes, it's complicated. She lets out a frustrated sigh. Izuku approaches her, picking up the other sponge laying on the counter. He doesn't say anything for a moment, appreciating the comfortable silence between him and his mother, only broken by the sound of the water hitting the bottom of the sink. He knows he has to choose his words carefully. He picks up a dirty plate, and surprisingly, his mother is the first to talk. It's just, he lost his job in America, and I know it's his way to cope, but she places down the glass she just washed back into the sink. But Izuku doesn't have the heart to tell her, and so she picks up another. I'm just so exhausted, and it's only been a week, you know. But I thought if I gave it a few days it would get better, but instead, it did the opposite. The water is starting to get a little too hot, so Izuku cools the water down a bit. Do you want to stay with him? He tries. It's complicated, she replies, and again she picks the clean glass of water at the bottom of the sink and cleans it again. It doesn't have to be, he says quietly. His mother sighs. Again, Izuku. No, Mom, listen. He grabs her arm gently, and when her eyes catch the bruising on his wrist, a small gasp escapes her lips. What is this? Her voice is trembling. Izuku lets go of her arm to wrap his hand around his other wrist, as if to hide the bruises, even though they're still very visible. He looks away from her. It's nothing, just something from training. Izuku, she repeats, in a whisper, worried or maybe even scared. Izuku feels her eyes stay on him, even when he continues to wash the dishes, and he feels naked, exposed. It was him, wasn't it? She's asking, but Izuku is pretty sure she already knows the answer. What's the point of lying at this point? It would be unfair to ask his mother to tell the truth and continue to lie himself. Yeah. He shuts off the water and closes his hands on the edge of the counter, holding himself upright. He looks down at the empty sink in front of him, unable to meet his mother's eyes. Oh, baby, she wraps her arms around him. It hits him now how hard this whole thing must have been for his mother. He'd been so caught up with himself that he didn't think about how it had affected her. Well, sure, she had looked happy at first, but he should have known better from the moment he entered the apartment last night. So, he turns a bit to face her and lets himself be held, holding her back as well. His eyes start to water, but he closes his eyes before the tears can fall. I'm so sorry, Izuku. Her voice cracks. I should have been more. I should have. Mom, it's okay. She shakes her head. No, you don't understand. Izuku pulls back a little. He searches her eyes for any indication of what she's thinking. But this time she's the one who won't meet his eyes. He doesn't let go of her. What? I've made a mistake. She sounds anxious all of a sudden. He asked to share our bank account because he had lost his job, and it made sense, so I didn't think much of it. But now he has everything and… Mom, breathe. It's going to be all right. She finally looks up. There has to be someone who can help us, or something we can do. She shakes her head. There's no one. He's the only one I had left. Izuku, and I have no friends or coworkers to turn to, and now, what about the police? He blurts out they can probably do something. Saying it out loud somehow sounds logical, but the more he thinks about it, the more he realizes this isn't a good idea. His mother probably already knows this, because she shakes her head. Your father is too convincing. They'll never believe a word we say over him, and it's true, the man could probably do anything and get away with it, which Izuku finds terrifying. There's only so much to do in this kind of situation, but he has no clue what the entirety of his options even is. It's not like he could text his friends and ask them if they could help him and his mother out because his father is kind of not such a good person. What would happen then? He doubts anyone would offer for them to crash on their couch. But even if they did, it wouldn't solve the issue of not having any more money to themselves. Okay, his mother breathes out. I can't take big amounts of money out of the bank account without your father noticing, she explains slowly, but I'll withdraw a little every day and on my payroll, and I'll take more shifts. I'll do anything I have to, just until we have enough to get help, okay? She probably won't admit it, but Izuku sees how frightened she looks. Her hands tremble a little, and her voice wavers. He can't say he's feeling any better, but he knows his mother will only worry more if he tells her. He hesitates. My teacher, he was worried about me, so he gave me his number, he says. He shoots a quick glance at his mother to see her reaction. But she looks the same, if only a bit more attentive to his words. We could go to him if things, She smiles sadly. I know. The front door opens again, unfortunately, around half an hour later. His father enters holding a pack of beer in one hand, and something else Izuku can't quite make out from his seat at the table. Once he's closer, the man places the beers on the table, right beside Izuku's homework. His mother looks up from the counter and turns to look at his father. She looks angry, for some reason, probably something to have to do with the conversation they had earlier. Don't you think you've had enough this week? She asks, clearly annoyed to see how the man was spending her hard-earned money. She turns back to the cutting board in front of her. Izuku tries to make himself look small, and stays quiet as though they might forget he's there if he didn't make a sound. His father approaches his mother anyway, and once he's beside her he takes out flowers from behind his back. Oh, so that's what he'd been holding, Izuku thinks. I'm sorry, the man says, holding the red tulips up to his wife, though she makes no move to take them. She puts the knife down in front of her. You can't keep doing this, she sighs. His father scoffs, still with a smile on his face. What are you talking about? He asks, but Izuku knows he's just messing around. He knows exactly what he's doing. Can't I just show my wife some affection? He tries to put his free hand around her, but she pushes him away. No, you can't keep coming here and tell me how sorry you are and then expect me to forgive you, she snaps. Come on, everything was fine yesterday. Yesterday, she starts in a low voice. I didn't know you had hurt Izuku. The man pinches the bridge of his nose before gesturing to Izuku. Really? So that's what this is about? This good-for-nothing child? Don't speak of him that way, she responds angrily. Izuku turns his head slightly toward them, though he keeps his gaze on the ground. Mom, it's fine. No, Izuku, it's not, she says. I let that go on for too long already, and I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. The boy tentatively looks up to his mother to see her looking at him with teary eyes. And when he tries a glance at his father, the man's eyes are also on him, a displeased expression plastered on his face. You told her? He asks, and it takes Izuku a few seconds before he realizes he's talking to him. He opens his mouth to reply, but his mother speaks up first. He didn't tell me, I found out myself. What difference does it make? He told you, you found out. The end result is the same. He approaches Izuku, and before he has a chance to move, the man yanks him by the hair and throws him out of his chair. He's still fucking useless. Izuku's head hits the floor and he yelps. There's static in his head and he thinks he can hear his mother screaming his name in the background. Something hits his stomach, bringing back his awareness when he coughs harshly. He tries to roll on the floor and curl in on himself in an attempt to feel better, but a heavy pressure settles on his chest, keeping him in place. Why are you doing this? His mother wails, grabbing and pulling the older man's arm. The air is harder to breathe, there's less of it. Or well, that's what Izuku thinks in his dizzed mind. But then after a while, he can't breathe at all. He grabs onto the thing putting pressure on his lungs, which after a moment he understands is a leg, and weakly tugs at it. The foot jerks back and, in the process, manages to hit Izuku's face. He hears his mother gasp and squeezes his eyes shut from the pain. His head spins, even with his eyes closed. He cracks one eye open, the sight of the white ceiling too bright. But he opens his other eye anyway. Izuku wishes the earth would open up and swallow him whole, but that would mean leaving his mother alone, and he can't do that. Somehow, he manages to sit up, and suddenly his mother is at his side, brushing her thumb on his cheek. At this moment, Izuku thinks she looks terribly sad. She looks up at the man and whispers, "Get out of my house." Izuku stands, or well, sits, between the two adults, and he's uncomfortable, but he's not sure whether that's because he's in pain or because how the entire situation. Probably both. His father scoffs. Pupils wide, "Me. I should be the one to leave." "You're out of your goddamn mind," she answers, pressing her face in Izuku's hair. He'd like for this to be over. He'd like for him and his mother to just stay like this forever, to not have to continue going through this or even to try to solve their problems. "So now I'm the problem?" he asks in disbelief, running a hand through his head. "I'll fucking show you how much of a problem I can be." Izuku is still on the floor when the man goes around the table. He hears bottles clanking and then a shattering of glass. Some fragments get stuck in his head, and one bigger piece manages to scratch his cheek. A few droplets of beer fall on him and his mother, and quickly the liquid becomes sticky on his skin. "See," the man shouts, "this is a problem." He throws another bottle on the table, and Izuku is terrified. He doesn't feel like a hero or anything close to it. He feels like a child, seeking comfort in his mother's hold as she shields him against the world. Except, this time she can't protect him. And maybe she never could in the first place, because he's not a child anymore. Tears sting his eyes as he can't quite get them to close completely. And when he does, hot tears course down his freckled cheeks. "Stop, please," his mother pleads. But the man ignores her, repeating the action once and then twice. Eventually, it ends, and the man decides he's had enough and heads out the door, to go where Izuku doesn't know. Red tulips lie still on the ground, scattered instead of being held together as they're supposed to, with some of the petals broken and lost farther on the floor amongst shards of glass. Clouds now fill the sky, and the lack of sunlight in the room makes the place look miserable, but it matches the stillness in the air. The side of Izuku's head hurts, and he thinks it might be bleeding, but he doesn't know for sure. He doesn't dare reach his hand up to touch it and see for himself. There's also a metallic taste in his mouth he wants to spit out, but he doesn't want to make a mess, and so he swallows it back. His stomach, his head, his cheek, his nose, everything hurts, but he gets up anyway. All of a sudden, he remembers the homework he had been working on, still on the table. Izuku scrambles to retrieve his papers, but it's already too late. His writing is smudge, and he can't let it dry because it's not water, it's a yellowish sticky liquid, and there's no way he can give this back to Aizawa when he goes back to school. Everything hurts, and everything is going wrong. Izuku wonders what he'll say to explain his state and his missing assignment. Maybe he and his mother will be gone by then, and things will be alright. He doubts he'll be out of here soon. He has 100 worries, but for now the only one he thinks about is the soaked illegible paper in his hands, and what he'll do with it. "Don't move your head so much," Izuku's mother repeats softly. He's sitting on the closed toilet seat while she presses a wet towel up to his cheek to wash the blood away. He hisses when she touches the small cut right underneath his right eye with an alcohol wipe. Izuku had tried telling his mother he could do it himself, but she had insisted, and in the end, he hadn't been able to refuse her help. He's feeling pretty tired, but going back to sleep now would ruin his sleep schedule, though, isn't it already? The room doesn't feel uncomfortable, but Izuku feels like he's in a daze, all while his thoughts are going a mile an hour. He wants to say something, ask his mother everything he's been dreading to ask because he's certain she'll listen. "What will we do now? Are you all right? Will we be all right? Do you love him?" he asks without thinking instead. And he's surprised by his own question. His mother frowns a bit in thought, but she doesn't seem offended. "A love that's lasted for so long takes a long time to fade away completely," she answers. It makes sense, Izuku thinks. He doesn't know what else he'd expected to hear, but he doesn't blame her. He had kind of hoped maybe she would have changed her mind about this. But it's like she said, those things take time, and, Well, that's what I would have said before, she adds, surprising Izuku, who blinks in return, but I don't believe that's true anymore. Not after watching him lay his hands on you. His mother washes the blood off the towel and then leaves it to dry on the side of the bath. She smiles at him, and Izuku smiles back, not in a promise that things will be alright, or that they will be, but that no matter what happens, they'll have each other. And for now, it makes everything feel a little more okay. The air is tense when his father gets back. But Izuku is glad because the man doesn't utter a single word to them. He looks calmer, too, but the green-haired teen knows better than to think he'll be able to predict when that will change. Izuku stays in his room for most of the day, trying to clear his mind from all the events of earlier replaying in his head. He does some homework for some time, but eventually, his mind inevitably goes back to those thoughts, and there's nothing left to distract him. What good is having a quirk if he can't even use it to defend himself? All Might trusts him to become a great hero and work hard, but all of his efforts are rendered useless when Izuku is facing his father. It's not that he couldn't beat the man in a fight, he's pretty sure he could. The thing stopping him was that the villains he had fought had always been people unrelated to him. This is his father. It doesn't matter that the man had been gone for years now. This is somehow closer to him, much more personal, and Izuku has no idea what to do in this situation. He thinks of Katsuki, and their fight a few months ago at Ground Beta. He tries to compare it to his situation, to find a solution, but stops himself quickly. He won't compare his father to Katsuki. No, they're not alike in any way. Breaking out of his thoughts, Izuku grabs the side of his desk to help himself stand up. He had tried to remember his answers from the homework his father had completely ruined earlier in order to write them down again. But he hadn't been able to read the words written on it, and he had been too distracted to think properly. He feels thirsty, but drinking water means going outside of his room, and so he thinks he could do without it. But then that makes Izuku a coward, and he knows heroes are brave. And also, he is still thirsty. So he decides to go in the bathroom to drink water instead, because that way he doesn't see his father and it means he's not a coward. Izuku is not scared, he is strong. Getting his courage up, he approaches his door, pushing away every thought of doubt away. He raises his trembling hand to the handle and closes his fist around it. The door slowly opens with a creak, and Izuku feels betrayed by it for exposing him like this. It's all right, he reminds himself, you're just going to get some water and then you'll come back and it'll be fine. He looks toward the bathroom door, and it's closed. The light under it tells him someone is inside. The shower is also running. He notices a moment later, and he knows it's his mother because she always closes the television while showering. Izuku considers going back inside his room. Maybe dying from dehydration wouldn't be so bad as to run into his father after all. No, he won't give up now. He needs proof he still has what it takes to become a hero. You can't take the easy way out for this one. He looks behind him to the living room and his confidence falters a bit, but he goes anyway. Just like he had thought, unfortunately, his father is there, watching the television, his back to him. It's unclear whether the man simply hasn't heard Izuku approach him, or if he's just ignoring him. He figures it's the latter and makes his way to the sink. The teen looks over his shoulder, making sure his father is still ignoring him, which he is, and grabs a glass from the drying rack. The clacking of glass against ceramic plates makes Izuku wince. And again he turns his head to look at his father, but he doesn't seem to notice him at all. He fills his glass quickly, drinks it, and refills it so he won't have to come back to get more until tomorrow. He makes sure not to spill any on his way back to his room, but right when he's about to step inside, the bathroom door opens, startling him. He spills a few drops of water on the floor, which upsets him because he hadn't been able to complete this small task. The sight of his mother's disheveled hair still dripping on the floor, already dressed in her nurse uniform even though she was still in the shower a minute ago, confuses him. Now, the droplets of water he'd spilled seem unimportant next to the puddle she's making. She doesn't have work for the time Izuku will be home. She's not supposed to, at least, that's what she had told him. Before he has a chance to ask her what she's doing, her eyes meet his and widen as if she had just found something she was looking for. Izuku, she says and walks up to him. She looks like she's in a hurry, and she probably is. The hospital just called. They need someone right now. What, now? She looks at him with an apologetic smile on her face. I had told them I would take extra shifts, for. Oh, right. They need money, and his father surely isn't going to be the one to give it to them. In fact, he is doing the complete opposite of that. I know, he answers. He knows, and he understands, but he wishes he didn't need to. He wishes he wouldn't understand so that he wouldn't worry about asking her to stay with him instead, at least for now, even if it means it will take longer for them to figure things out. When will you? I'll be back tomorrow morning, she tells him, as if she had read his mind. And, if something happens, I need you to call me right away, okay? Or even that teacher of yours, all right. She holds both sides of his head, so he can look at her directly in the eyes, and Izuku feels his heartache. He can't be selfish and ask her to stay. He knows she would, one word is all it takes, and she would never leave him. But if he does this, he won't only be throwing his chance of getting out of this faster, it'll also be his mother's, and he can't do that to her. Yeah, he breathes out. Okay, she brushes her thumb on his cheek before wrapping her arms around him. They stay like this for a few moments and eventually pull away. Stay safe for me, she asks. Izuku nods, and as he watches her walk to the door in hurried footsteps, he wonders just how he's going to do that. Izuku, his father says loudly from his place on the couch. The freckled boy is still in his room, and he flinches at the man's voice. He doesn't sound angry nor happy. He's just calling Izuku. Come here for a minute. Standing up, the teen swallows. There's no way there's something good waiting for him on the other side of that door. He doesn't lose time going to his door and opening it. He knows the more he waits, the more likely it becomes his father will be annoyed with him, if he isn't already. The older Midoriya stands in the space between the kitchen and the living room, his back turned to Izuku. The boy makes his footsteps a bit heavier to announce his presence. The man turns around, just enough that Izuku is able to see he's holding something, and then he comes to a stop. Aizawa Shota, his father says as if tasting the words written on the small piece of paper. Is that a friend of yours? Izuku feels his heart sink. How did his father get his hand on the post-it? When did Izuku lose it? He can't actually tell the man that this is his teacher. There are so many things that could go wrong if he did, and Izuku doesn't want to risk it. His father seems to be getting impatient with his lack of response, which pressures him into answering. No, he says, which is true. But you know who he is. It's more of a statement than a question, but Izuku thinks his father is expecting him to answer anyway. Well, why yes, but it's complicated. A beat of silence passes, and his father doesn't say anything. It's awkward, Izuku thinks, the way he looks so intensively at the small bit of paper. The freckled boy can't do anything other than wait for him to say or do something else. But a moment later he wishes they could have stayed in this uncomfortable silence for a bit longer. It's your mother, isn't it? She's seeing someone else. What? No, it's not. Don't lie to me, Izuku. The man tears his gaze from the piece of paper to look at Izuku, and the boy snaps his mouth shut. That fucking whore. Don't call her that. Izuku finds himself replying angrily. His father wants to be mad at him, fine, but he doesn't get to take it out on his mother. It's not like that. She would never. You're talking back to me. The man laughs, but there's no humor in his voice. It's mine, Izuku admits without thinking. He'll regret it later, but right now, he just wants this to stop. He would like to stop existing just for now, or be 2 weeks before, or even a month ahead. Anytime but now. His father approaches him at a quick pace, scaring Izuku that he takes a step back, and stops right in front of him, waving the paper in front of his face. So who is it? Izuku's confidence falters. It's not important. Well then, you won't mind if I get rid of it. Before he has a chance to open his mouth, the older man brings the paper closer to his lips. Izuku wonders what he's doing when suddenly the post-it catches on fire. He winces back from the sudden heat. It takes him a few seconds to understand what just happened. And then he remembers his father's quirk. Fire breathing. The paper turns to ash, taking Izuku's only way out with it. He feels his eyes start to water, but he feels irritated and annoyed. He feels terrified, too, but he ignores it. What gives his father the right to just come back into their lives and mess everything up? Izuku shouldn't need any help or a way out, but he does. And he had one, but now he doesn't anymore. How dare you? He whispers under his breath, looking straight ahead to where the paper had once been. Everything seems to still around him. It's as if Izuku was somewhere else. The only sound he can make out is the increasing rate of his heartbeat. Don't tell me you're going to cry about something so meaningless, his father sneers. You're pathetic. Time clicks back into place, and a tear rolls down his cheek. Rage overwhelms his heart immensely, in a way he had never felt before. His mind is blank except for that feeling. He doesn't think about anything else, only about how much he hates the person in front of him. He activates One for All and shoves his father back. How dare you? He cries out, his breath shaking. The man goes flying to the floor. And when he looks up he glares at the teen, obviously taken aback by Izuku's sudden outburst. He places his hand on the wall in an attempt to stabilize himself as he gets to his feet. His hand is bleeding, Izuku notices, from the way a few drops of red liquid fall on the floor. It must have been from a shard of glass laying on the ground that had been missed earlier when he and his mother were cleaning up. Izuku blinks, breaking out of his haze. It takes him a second to realize what he's done, and a few more to imagine the consequences of his action. I'm sorry, he stutters. His father takes a step forward, and Izuku steps back. I didn't mean it. His back hits the wall behind him. On his right is the hallway leading to his room, and at the end of it, the balcony. The man is blocking the path to the front door, so he can't run. The man is closer now. And then before Izuku has a chance to move, his father blows fire straight at him. Or maybe he had aimed close to him, right where the hallway is, to make him cower away. Maybe not, but that's what it does anyway. Izuku moves out of the way just in time, but he isn't entirely spared. A flame gets a little too close to his arm, causing him to yelp and squeeze his eyes shut. "Where's that quirk of yours now? Huh? Please," he whimpers. He doesn't know what he's asking. Maybe for the man to leave him alone, or to forgive him, to believe him when he says he didn't mean it. His father crouches down in front of him and grabs the curls on the side of his head, holding his head upright so their eyes can meet. "You're still as miserable as when I left you," he says, disappointment, or perhaps revulsion, or something else Izuku doesn't know, laced in his tone. Because no matter how many friends you make, or how much you train your quirk, you'll always be that same weak, disgusting child crying over every little inconvenience. A moment passes, and another. The man stands up again and starts to walk away, but only takes a few steps before Izuku speaks up. "I'm not," he says, voice trembling. His father stops and turns his head to look at him, uncurling from his position on the floor. "What was that?" I'm different from when you left," he scoffs. "Don't make me laugh. You know I'm right. Just make it easier for the both of us and accept it already." "You're wrong." The man stays silent for a moment in thought. "Am I?" Izuku finally stands up. "Yeah," he answers, as if he had been holding his breath. This seems to be enough to anger his father all over again. But Izuku won't make the same mistake twice. This time, he knows to expect fire, and he manages to move out of the way in time. He goes to make a run for the front door, but the man blocks his way. Izuku looks behind him and he sees the balcony. His eyes flicker back to his father and he sees the way his eyes widen the moment he realizes what Izuku is about to do. "Izuku," he says in warning, but it's too late. The boy takes a single step back and then starts running to the glass door. When he hears the man start after him a moment later, he prays in his head that the door won't be locked, because if it is it'll take too long to open, and he doesn't have a second to spare. "Don't be locked, don't be locked." It must only take 4 or 5 seconds before Izuku puts his hand on the handle of the sliding door and pulls for it to open, and it does. This is a 6-story drop, but if he does it right, he won't get hurt. He looks back one last time to his father, who he sees is speed walking in his direction. It's only a matter of seconds before he reaches him. "Izuku, don't you fucking dare," he shouts. This is all it takes for Izuku to put his foot on the concrete fence, activate one for all full cowling, and jump. He thinks he feels a hand brush against the fabric of his leg, but soon forgets about it when he realizes he doesn't actually have a solid plan of what he's going to do. He'll definitely run into the other apartment building soon, and so he prepares himself to grab onto it. The air is knocked out of his lungs when his chest hits another concrete fence like the one he had jumped off of, but nothing could have prevented it. Izuku knows he has to be quick, because this is someone else's apartment he's holding onto, and his father will probably go after him if he doesn't hurry. He climbs down the best he can to the balcony below, and then the other one lower. Once he's close enough to the ground, he jumps down, and his knees give out under him. Izuku scrambles back to his feet. Every little noise outside makes him panic, and he wonders if his father is already close by. He'll definitely kill Izuku if he finds him now, or worse. Not losing any time, he sprints off again. The sun has set, and the sky is stuck between day and night, made of a vibrant bluish color, much unlike the brightness of his father's fire. His head is pounding, and his legs throbbing. His heart is beating so fast that Izuku thinks it might burst out of his chest. Things and buildings around him are hard to make out, so he focuses on the path ahead of him. He doesn't know where he's heading, only what he's running from. At first, he stays on the sidewalk, his footsteps silent against the concrete since he had forgotten to put his shoes on. He realizes there's no one else out at this hour, and that he would be pretty easy to spot if someone came looking for him, which is exactly what's happening right now, probably. He decides to zigzag in different alleys, not caring where they're taking him as long as he keeps going. Every now and then, he looks behind him to make sure no one is following him. Sometimes, he hears a car pass by, and he wonders if it's his father, or maybe the police if he called them to go after him, too. Maybe Izuku is paranoid, but it doesn't matter now. He has to get away. "If something happens, I need you to call me right away, okay? Or even that teacher of yours, all right." It seemed so silly then, or unlikely that something would happen that he would need to call someone. But now he does, because he's running outside in the middle of the night. He doesn't know where he is, and he doesn't have a phone. He needs to call his mother to tell her not to go back home after her shift. She'll be in danger if she goes back to the apartment and his father is still there. But Izuku isn't, but he'll have to worry about that later. Izuku's vision starts to spin, either from exhaustion or because he's hit his head too many times today, probably both. He slows his pace, telling himself he'll start running again in just a minute. Everything had been easier to ignore before because of the adrenaline. But now that it starts wearing off, his headache becomes much more obvious, as well as the small cuts on his knees from this morning and the burn from. Izuku doesn't know how much time has passed since he left, only that the sky is pitch black now. A thud echoes behind him. The alley he stands in is dark, and so it's hard to make out the figure in front of him. Izuku panics a bit, thinking his father already caught up to him, but then the person gets closer to him. His breath catches in his throat when he finally recognizes the stranger. His voice cracks. Aizawa-sensei. Perhaps it's because of how desperate he sounds, but his teacher stops. Problem child. Izuku feels incredibly tired now, and he thinks he's safer now than he was before. Sensei. He goes to take a step forward but falls on his knees. The pro hero is by his side a moment later, holding him as best as he can. The teen coughs, and he thinks he hears the man curse under his breath. Midoriya. He calls out to him, Midoriya, what's going on? Are you hurt? Izuku shakes his head before stopping himself and nodding a bit, which he regrets a second later when his head starts hurting even more. Head kinda hurts. Izuku slurs, and then, sorry, he lets himself go limp in his teacher's grip, not enough strength left to hold himself upright. Hey, stay with me. The pro hero keeps calling out to him, and it's the last thing he hears before his vision goes dark. The dream of every little kid is to one day become a hero, and it's fine, but only as long as it stays that way. Sometimes, circumstances make it an unobtainable goal. It's a dangerous job, the risks of injuries are high, and it's easy to get killed if the person isn't trained well enough. But with everything comes exceptions, and somehow there are always some who are able to reach this dream. In this case, it is Shouta's job to make sure they learn everything they need in order to do well and to protect them. This year's class is different. He should have known better than to get attached. There are too many risks involved, but after everything that had happened this year, the villain attacks, the Camino incident, it was inevitable. He knows they have potential, and he wants to help them become the best heroes they can be. Everything had started to calm down a bit the past few months, and things were looking fine. At least, that's what Shouta had thought. But then last Friday, as he was walking down the corridor, he overheard a conversation he obviously wasn't meant to hear, and things only went downhill from there. The indistinct whispers were what caught his attention first. But as he got closer, he realized there were two voices. It could have been a lot of things. A small argument between two students, bullying, a private conversation. Shouta didn't know, but he would rather be safe than sorry. He made sure to silence his steps so the people wouldn't notice him. One word in particular caught his attention. Deku. Well, he only knows two people who commonly use that name, two people which happen to be his students, and one of them being a girl. The voice certainly didn't belong to her, so that meant Bakugo. The whispers got louder until they were not whispers anymore. Aunt let me, I'll tell Aizawa. A conversation between two of his problem children about something one of them wanted to tell him. Shouta honestly doubted this was something good. Actually, scratch that. It was obvious something important was happening here, and so he decided to step in. Tell me what? They had both seemed surprised to see him, which was expected. They brushed him off, even though he hadn't missed the way Bakugo had hesitated for a second before doing so. Maybe it was because he was curious, or because he was worried, but Shouta caught Midoriya's arm before he left so that he could ask more questions. The teen tensed up, his shoulders became stiff, and he froze in place, taking the pro hero aback. He carefully chose his next words, using a soft tone he normally used with children to comfort them during a mission, or with Eri when she starts panicking. Problem child, what's all this about? There was no reply for a moment, and then the smaller teen dismissed his concern. Shouta waited a bit longer and then he caught a glimpse of his eyes, very tired eyes that held a lot of fear in them, so he had let him go. Later, he had found himself in the teacher's lounge unable to concentrate on the papers in front of him. He had replayed the scene over and over again in his head, telling himself something wasn't quite right, yet he hadn't been able to put his finger on it. He sighed and leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen on his desk until an idea popped into his mind. He opened the drawer under his desk and took out a stack of yellow post-it notes. Shouta knew he couldn't do much, but at least maybe this would help to ease his mind. He wrote down his phone number, and then his name right above it, just to make it clearer. After folding it in two, he put it in his pocket and let himself think about something else. Maybe he worried for nothing at all, and he really hoped he did, that he was imagining things, but another part of him knew this was something bigger. Later, he will give the piece of paper to Midoriya, but until then, he'll forget about it. Then later eventually came, and Shouta went to look at his class to see if they were all right or needed any help with packing. The holiday was rather short, but it would have to do. His students seriously deserved it, so he hoped they would enjoy it. Well, he knew it wasn't that simple. There were always a few who would linger in the dorms a little longer and others who actually decided to stay. He had earned who those teens usually were, and what to expect, but Midoriya was certainly not one of them. When a student doesn't want to go back home, it can mean many things, and it doesn't always have something to do with a bad home life. It can also mean nothing at all. But with what happened earlier, this unusual behavior, plus the lack of attention during the whole week, things simply didn't add up. So he gave Midoriya his number, because there was nothing else he could do for someone who didn't want help. The following night, Shouta still hadn't gotten a phone call. He hoped it was a good sign, but there was really no way to be certain. He had imagined a lot of different things that could happen, whether it be the subject of the conversation between Midoriya and Bakugo, or what would happen when school would start again. But out of all those different scenarios, what Shouta hadn't expected was to find his student in a sketchy alley late at night, terrified and definitely hurt, only for him to faint in his arms a minute later. As a pro hero, being prepared for different situations or knowing how to adapt quickly is crucial. But this exact scenario, he had no idea what to do. Shouta thought of the hospital first, but that would mean calling Midoriya's parents, and maybe this wasn't the best idea for now. He remembers one time a few years ago, the ambulance took too long to arrive, and so he had carried an injured civilian all the way to the hospital. As it turns out, the woman had been in an abusive relationship, and when her husband arrived, he requested that she be discharged, despite how badly she was hurt. Shouta had no right to protest, and so he had reluctantly let her leave, and 2 weeks later, she had been shot dead by the same man. The pro hero shook the memory away. He had to do something, but only had so many options. The hospital was a no, UA was too far, and he needed to find somewhere fast. So he took his phone out of his pocket with his free hand, the other one busy holding the unconscious boy, and cursed under his breath when he almost dropped the device. He pressed his first contact, and after a few seconds, the person on the other end answered. "Shouta, aren't you on your shift right now? Are you all right?" Hisashi's voice quickly shifted from tired to worried. "I'm all right," he replies. "I need you to call Chiyo. I'll explain everything when I get home." "What? Shoo?" And then he hung up. Now, Shouta sits at the kitchen table, holding his head in his hand while Hisashi puts a blanket over the unconscious boy on the couch. Fortunately, Chiyo had agreed to come as soon as possible, and so he and his husband could only wait for the time being. "You scared me, you know," Hisashi says softly. It's not a remark nor an accusation, but guilt pricks at Shouta's heart anyway. As much as he pained him to admit it, he hadn't been prepared for this. The blonde pulls back the chair right beside him quietly before sitting down. "I'm not mad, I'm just..." "I know." Shouta looks back to the figure on the couch and watches as the blanket rises up and down. He turns his phone upward to look at the time, but it's only been a minute since he last checked. Hisashi turns the device down again and puts his hand over his in a comforting manner. "Talk to me." Shouta sighs, his eyes flickering once to his student before looking back down. He turns his hand slightly and intertwines his fingers with Hisashi's. "I saw him running around in empty streets, and I thought it was odd, especially at this hour, so I followed him. I didn't know it was him at the time, but then he recognized me and he lost consciousness, and then I call you." His husband nods as he talks and simply listens, but it's enough to get some weight off his chest. People usually think Hisashi is all talk and that Shouta is quieter, but when it comes down to just the two of them, the blonde is really the one who listens to him most. "Honestly, not the worst thing we've seen this kid do," Hisashi jokes, and Shouta snorts despite the situation. The blonde had always been good at making heavy subjects feel a bit lighter. Wish I could say otherwise. A few minutes later, there's a knock on the door and Shouta gets up abruptly to go open it. The heroine was one of the few people to know about their relationship. She had first learned about it back when the two men were still boys in high school, training to become heroes. Shio had helped them then, and she continued to do so day as she stepped inside of their apartment. "Shouta, I thought you were the one injured because Hisashi had been the one to call me. Where is he?" The man in question gets up from his chair and the elderly woman scrunches her eyebrows in confusion. "Hisashi." He shakes his head, although no question had been asked, and gestures with his head to the couch. A small gasp escapes Chiyo's lips, and she doesn't lose time making her way over to the teen. "Good lord, you didn't think about going to the hospital before calling me?" Shouta doesn't reply. He had thought about it and had ultimately decided against it. The older hero opens the lamp closest to the couch and lowers the blanket. "That poor boy. What trouble did he get himself into this time?" she asks, tilting his head gently to get a closer look at his face. Midoriya's eyes flutter under his closed eyelids, but still, they don't open. "We're not sure." Hisashi answers for both of them, giving Shouta a side glance. It's the first time Shouta actually sees his student's face and injuries clearly. It had been too dark outside to really see much of anything. When he had entered the apartment, the lights were already dim, and he hadn't thought of lighting them up. There are small scratches on his cheeks, and some still look fairly recent. Just as Shouta thinks she's about to be done looking him over, she grabs for the kid's arm closest to the back of the couch, stops moving for a moment, and then looks at her now red fingers. The underground hero's body stiffens. How had he missed that? She pulls the sleeve of his shirt up and lifts the arm up so that his forearm rests on top of the cover. There's bruising on his wrists, too. It's faint, and Shouta is too far to really see it clearly, but he's certain it's there. Shio asks Hisashi to go grab a cold washcloth. Shouta frowns and walks closer to her with his arms crossed. "Can't you just heal him?" She shakes her head. "I'm guessing the boy passed out from exhaustion or maybe too much stress, and if I'm right, he doesn't have enough energy for me to use my quirk on him. But even if that wasn't the case, I'm not going to risk it. Hisashi comes back and hands the wet towel to her. It feels terrible, having to see his student be injured and still be unable to do much to help. I'm sorry, I really wish I could do more to help, the woman says, turning back to face them. For now, he needs rest. The best thing you can do for him is to be there when he wakes up. And when he does, call me and I'll come right away. Thank you, Shouta says, only tearing his gaze away from the boy when the heroine pats his arm. He walks her back to the door, but she stops right before stepping outside. This doesn't look good, Shouta. I know, I'm looking into it. I didn't want to believe it could be that. Shio nods, somewhat understanding what he had meant. They both say goodbye, and when Shouta turns back to the living room, he sees Hisashi sitting down on the low coffee table right in front of the couch, resting his chin on his hands in thought. It's strange to have someone else in their home like this. They usually never have guests, although they do have a guest bedroom. It's mostly used for storage. Well, there is another presence in their home, but he seems to have chosen this very moment to make his first appearance. Sushi, a stray cat Hisashi and he had found outside a little over 3 years ago. He walks quietly to the coffee table and sits next to the blonde. Somehow, the caramel-colored creature always seems to know when he's needed most. Shouta makes his way over to them. You should head to bed, he says. His husband lifts his hand to scratch behind the ears of the cat. He looks at the cat for a moment and watches the way the animal pushes his head further into the man's palm. Hisashi's gaze falls back onto the sleeping boy. For how long? He licks his lips and frowns. I just don't understand. He looked fine, Shu. I'm not sure, Shouta answers. We can ask him when he wakes up. Hisashi turns his head up to look at him abruptly. Do you think there are others we've missed? What if? Hey, it's okay. The dark-haired man sits down beside his lover. We couldn't have known then. But now we do, so we can focus on doing everything we can do to help him. The voice hero sighs. You're right. He slides his hand under his glasses to rub at his eyes. And then he stands up. You coming? Shouta shakes his head. I want to be there when he wakes up so he doesn't freak out. They both tell each other goodnight and Shouta is left alone with the boy. His student had grown a lot over the course of the year, both physically and mentally. Yet, he looks incredibly small in this moment. Shouta walks over to the smaller couch beside the one Midoriya is sleeping on. Sushi joins him. And at some point, despite everything, he drifts off to sleep. Izuku's head hurts, terribly so. He usually only has those headaches when he's in the hospital. But he doesn't think that's where he is. The constant beep from the heart monitor is missing, as is the prick in his arm where a needle should sit. The smell of antiseptic he has become familiar with, too, is nowhere to be found. So, he figures he is in his room. That's what he thinks at first, but then he grabs the fabric sitting on him and realizes it's not his, nor like any of the ones they have at home. Slowly, the memories of the night before start creeping up at the back of his mind. He remembers the fight he had with his father, first, and then how he had jumped from the balcony. He had run for a while after that, a long while. And then what? Something obviously had to have happened, or else he'd either still be running or lying in an alley or maybe dead. But he is none of those things. Think Izuku, he tells himself. He looks around a bit, and then his heart skips a beat when his gaze falls on the cat staring at him and sitting right by his feet. How had he not noticed it before? The lime-colored irises bore into his deeper green ones so intensively that Izuku doesn't dare to look away. He holds his breath, waiting for the animal to do anything at all. He's never had any pets, so he never really knows how to act around them. After a minute of this, Izuku's breathing slows, and the cat inches closer to his face. And that's when he notices it, the figure behind the cat. The room had been too dark for him to notice before, but now that his eyes were used to the darkness, there's no doubt. His teacher is sitting on the smaller couch close to the one Izuku is on, and he is asleep. That's right. He had run into Aizawa earlier that night and then everything is a blur. He had run into the pro hero because he had been running away from his father. Before that, they'd been in a fight that could have been avoided if he had stayed in his room. Why had he decided to come out of his room? Izuku, his father says loudly from his place on the couch. Come here for a minute. Right, he hadn't truly been given a choice. What had they talked about again? Izuku remembers the man had pulled out the number Aizawa had given him, and then he had asked if his mother was cheating on him. His mother. Izuku sits up abruptly, startling the cat enough that he jumps back on the floor. What time is it? He can't let her go back home. He lifts his arm slightly to push the blanket off of him when he feels a sharp burning pain on his arm. He remembers it's because of yesterday, and he knows if he looks it'll make him feel worse, so he ignores it. Trying again, he lifts the blanket successfully this time and puts his feet on the floor. He doesn't want to wake up his teacher, so he's careful not to make any sound when getting up. He spots the door not too far from where he stands, so if he's quick enough, maybe he won't have to confront anyone. He takes the way around the couch, and a few steps later, he stumbles over something. Or well, someone makes him stumble. The cat just walked right in front of him, and because Izuku hadn't been paying enough attention to where he was walking, only to where he was heading. He had missed the cat coming his way. Izuku hears shuffling where his teacher is supposed to be, and he doesn't dare move any more than he already has. Problem child, a tired voice says. Izuku takes a step back, and it seems to wake Aizawa out of his haze. Well, another thing he's failed to do correctly. I'm sorry, thank you, he stutters, walking backward to the door for a few steps before his teacher has a chance to utter a word. Izuku doesn't let him finish, walking faster to the front door. He doesn't make it very far before he feels fabric wrap around his upper body, keeping him in place. It's vaguely familiar, but Izuku's mind is too panicked to do so much as think about anything other than the fact his mother might be in danger. He falls to his knees and slumps forward. Midoriya, whatever it is that has you in such a hurry, it can wait. No, it can't. My mom, Izuku struggles in the hold of the capture weapon. He doesn't want his teacher to worry about him. This was never meant to happen. Are you scared she'll be angry? What? No, it's not that. I just need. He lets himself go still. Let's talk about this, his teacher says simply, loosening his hold on him. This is all Izuku needs before he gets up quickly and passes the capture weapon over his head as he would with a shirt. But right when he's about to be done, Aizawa tugs on it. The capture weapon wraps around his forearms, and because it's tugging at the same time as Izuku tries to go forward, he twists and falls onto the floor on his side. His injured arm takes the hit and Izuku opens his mouth, but no sound comes out. It hurts so bad, but thinking about his mother injured in his place hurts more. He thinks he hears the man curse and flinches when he hears him creep closer to him, squeezing his eyes shut. Please, Izuku's lips are suddenly very dry, and he doesn't know what to say. You just tried to make a run for the door. He pauses, twice. I know. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. Aizawa sits on the floor right where he had been, leaving a distance between them. What was that just now? Izuku purses his lips and clenches his fists. Every time he hopes things will get better, they get worse instead. He manages to mess everything up, over and over again, and then he ends up in situations like this where, somehow, he has no options left, and he doesn't know if that's worse than having an opportunity and failing again. His teacher sighs. I'll let go, but you have to stay put. Can you do that? Slowly, Izuku nods. Aizawa, true to his words, loosens his hold on the capture weapon, and Izuku manages to sit up. He tentatively lifts his gaze up to look at his teacher. The pro hero slides his hand down his face. Damn it, problem child, he says, and then their eyes meet. Let me help. Izuku stays quiet. He'd promised he wouldn't try anything, but a little voice at the back of his mind tells him that his mother's sake is more important than him getting scolded later. Well, he knows this, truly believes it, but still, something keeps him from opening his mouth or lifting a single finger. Aizawa wants to help him, and it makes sense. He's a hero. It's basically his job, but the truth is there's not much to be done for him. That's not true. A different voice nags at him. He helped you yesterday when you... Izuku brushes the thought away. If there's one thing he doesn't need at the moment, it'd be his own mind disagreeing with him. He decides he'll stay quiet a little longer, and then he'll surprise his teacher by suddenly activating One for All and sprinting out the front door. Of course, this is a lie, but Izuku still keeps the idea close to him. I'm fine, he says. It's directed more to himself than it is to Aizawa. Maybe if he says it enough, it'll become true. For now, he wants to reassure his teacher that he's all right on his own. Someone worried meant someone who paid attention, and this could quickly become inconvenient. The man snorts. You want to try that again? No, I just want to leave, he almost says, but he doesn't. Izuku has no idea what he's going to do. Time is ticking and maybe he's already too late, but maybe he isn't, too, so he keeps thinking even though his head hurts terribly. He licks his lips, searching for something to say and the words to say it. I need to talk to my mom, is what he settles on. It's straight to the point, and it's true, and he hopes Aizawa will finally just take pity on him and let him go. Instead, the man speaks in a calm voice. You're injured, you won't make it far like this. And then before Izuku has the chance to protest, would calling her do the trick? Izuku snaps his head up. Why hadn't he thought of that before? His head is all over the place and just so cluttered that he had forgotten he had simpler options than running away like he always does. Swiftly, he moves his hand to his pocket and taps it lightly, searching for his phone. It's empty, and his heart jumps a little. He checks the other one, and then the other two behind, but he feels nothing. Sensing the teen's panic, Aizawa takes out his own phone. Here, he says, offering it to him. Hesitantly, Izuku searches the older man's face to make sure this is all right, and not some cruel joke, but it seems okay. He has to lean forward to take it because of the distance between them, but his teacher meets him halfway. The screen is already displaying the place to dial a number. Izuku gets into an awkward position as if was about to get up. Can I go somewhere private, goes unsaid, but Aizawa seems to understand anyway. No need, the man says. I'll go. He gets up and goes into a different room at the end of the corridor. Izuku waits until he hears the door shut with a click before looking back down at the phone in his hand. He thinks about how he could bolt for the door right now, and he couldn't be stopped. But right now, there's no reason to. So he rises to his feet because sitting on the floor and staying still is too nerve-wracking right now. He dials the number he has memorized since he was a child and stares at it. Izuku keeps staring until the numbers don't look quite right, don't seem to be in the right order. He's about to press the green button when he freezes. What if she doesn't answer? What will he do then? He bites his lower lip. He can't start doubting now, it might already be too late. So he finally presses his thumb down, lifts the device to his ear, and waits. It rings once, twice, thr. Hello, who is this? Mom. Izuku is relieved at the sound of his mother's voice on the other end. Izuku, she questions, sounding confused. Whose phone is this? Mom, where are you right now? He asks more urgently, ignoring her question. Wah, I was just heading home. Izuku, what's going on? No, don't go back. Izuku looks around to make sure no one's listening, putting the palm of his hand on the small speaker where the sound is coming out of the phone. His heart is beating so fast he thinks it might jump out of his chest. I can't explain right now, but please, just trust me. Izuku, his mother says. And for a moment the line stays silent. Neither of them speaks a word until she softly asks, are you safe? Yeah. He exhales. Yeah, I'm, the teacher I told you about. He's helping me. He hears her sigh. All right, okay. I'll find some place to go. Please just call me later. Of course, Izuku reassures her, I'll figure something out. He smiles, relieved that everything turns out to be fine after all. He's about to tell her goodbye and hang up and he hears her sniff. Mom, what's wrong? She lets out a dry laugh. I'm a terrible mother, aren't I? Burdening you with things that should never even cross your mind. Izuku looks down at his socks, which are dirty because he had run outside shoeless a few hours before. No, it's not your fault. I know you'd never blame me for it, but I promise I'll do better. You won't have to worry again, okay? Okay, he answers in a small voice. I love you. I love you, too. And they hang up. Izuku stands there, unsure what to do now that he's all alone in a place he doesn't know very well. He lingers in place, wondering if he should put the phone down somewhere or go knock on the door of the room he'd seen his teacher enter. The sound of his whispers doesn't fill the air anymore, replaced instead by silence. Or well, almost silence. Izuku notices hushed whispers coming from the place Aizawa had gone through. Well, he couldn't be on his phone, because Izuku is the one to have it unless he has two phones, which is unlikely. Then again, maybe he's just talking to himself, but Izuku shakes the thought away quickly. No, his teacher isn't the kind to talk to himself like that. Or is he? Izuku doesn't know. If it's neither of those options, the only thing left would be Aizawa is living with someone, maybe a roommate, or even, no, a partner. Izuku can't picture the man with anyone at all. Would he be with a woman as rational as him? Or maybe someone totally different from him? Oh God, what if it was Mrs. Joke? He remembers the two talking during their license exam. And although the man had seemed uninterested, Izuku wonders if it had only been a front to hide their relationship. It's not uncommon for pro heroes to keep them private. His thoughts keep spiraling. And suddenly Izuku feels very uncomfortable, like he's intruding in his teacher's life, which he is. He wouldn't be here in the first place if he had just dealt with it when he had the chance. He wonders where it all went wrong, where he messed up. It feels as though he's always cornered, having to make a decision with little time at his disposal because the more he waits, the worse it gets. Right this instant is a good example of this, seeing as Izuku doesn't have time left to decide what he'll do because the door opens. Aizawa steps out. And when he sees the boy already looking in his direction, he sighs and puts half his head back in the room. He already heard you, his teacher says. Izuku hears muffled cursing right before the other person steps out. He sees the long blonde hair first, and he thinks he's glad it's not Mrs. Joke after all, or someone he knows. But then he thinks the person looks a bit familiar. And a second later the realization hits him. He does know this person. It's not a woman at all. And on top of that, it's another one of his teachers. Present Mike. Unsure what to do, Izuku bows down a little, eyes glued on the floor. Hey, none of that now, Present Mike says, a smile evident in his voice. Izuku stands up and wonders why he's not angry at him, or at least annoyed. After all, Izuku is probably only here because Aizawa had felt bad for him. It's just Yamada outside of school. He winks. Izuku nods, even though he knows he probably won't be calling the man by his civilian name. It'd be too weird. He's been listening to the Voice Heroes radio show ever since he can remember, and he had never thought he would ever get to interact with him or be taught by him, even less enter his home. Fidgeting in place, Izuku suddenly remembers the phone in his hand, and he quickly holds it up. Aizawa walks closer to him and Izuku gives the device back to him. The air in the room is thick. He has no idea what to do now. Present Mike probably notices how uncomfortable he feels because he's the one to finally break the silence. Well, I'm starving, he says. I'll make breakfast. Both adults head to the kitchen, which is just a few feet from where they're currently standing. When Izuku doesn't make any move to follow, Aizawa turns to look at him and motions to the stools at the counter. Izuku waves his hands in front of him. Oh no, I should really get going now. The black-haired man opens one of the cabinets and takes out a plain mug. Not yet, he says simply. Recovery girl is coming. She'll be here in a few minutes. He presses 2 or 3 buttons of the coffee machine and places the ceramic mug down on the drip tray. Our recovery girl. Izuku questions, what for? But Aizawa just shoots him an unimpressed look. You know why, problem child. Izuku opens his mouth to protest but closes it just as quickly. There's no use arguing with his teacher at this point. Not when the man had basically saved him. It feels weird to admit it because so far he'd been trying to convince himself that he could have saved himself if something had gone differently. If Izuku had done something differently. But it had not. Things had happened. He got injured. And now he's stuck. He sits on one of the stools and stares at the counter island. The marble is hypnotizing, somehow. It's funny to think no one will ever count how many lines or cracks there are on it. That this number will always remain unknown. He knows there's a certain amount of them, but if he were to start counting them, he'd spend his entire life finding new ones he'd missed. Izuku feels like marble sometimes. Whenever he thinks things cannot get worse, they do, and he wonders if there will ever be an end to bad things happening to him. It's his fault, really, that he'd even needed help for this. If he'd just acted differently when they had first met, this would have never happened. His mother would have stayed happy. And maybe he would have too. A glass of water is pushed his way, and Izuku looks up to present Mike looking softly at him. I'd offer you some orange juice, but unfortunately we ran out. He's the only one who drinks it, Aizawa adds from his place, leaning against the sink and drinking his coffee. There's a smile on his lips, one Izuku is not used to seeing, but the blonde man must be because he fakes an upset look. Don't expose me like that. It's weird, yet somehow comfortable, just being here. It's always been just him and his mother, and they usually both do their own things in the morning. She had been all by herself raising him ever since he can remember. She had never had anyone to simply wake up or make breakfast with. Sure, she has Izuku, but this is different. He wonders if perhaps the moment he had ruined his mother's chance at being happy really was just a week ago, or if it had been as early as the day he was born. Izuku knows she loves him, but that would not stop her from resenting him anyway. The glass of water is cold against his hand. Little cubes are floating on the surface, and when he takes a sip they touch his lips. He keeps on drinking little by little, because if he's drinking, then no one will expect him to say anything. Eventually, a knocking sound echoes in the house. Izuku turns to look at the door, and then his eyes flicker to the 2 men. Aizawa walks closer to him, and present Mike is the one to go greet the elderly woman at the door. She leaves her coat to the blonde who hangs it up on the hooks fixed on the wall. She seems happy to see Izuku, or relieved, maybe it's a mix of both. How are you feeling this morning, dear? It's only now that he notices, but everyone is being so gentle with him, just with how they speak to him so calmly or the way their eyes soften at the sight of him. Izuku isn't quite sure how to feel about it, but for now, he only focuses on answering recovery girl. I'm good. She's beside him now. Do you mind if I sit here? She says, pointing to the stool beside his. He shakes his head and scoots a little to the side to give her more space, which doesn't do much. There's a first aid kit in her hands, and she puts it on the counter after sitting down. Recovery girl turns to him. Are you comfortable here or would you like to go somewhere more private? She asks. Izuku looks at his teachers, and then back at the woman. Here is fine, he stutters, not meeting her eyes. And so they stay exactly where they are. She then asks to see his arm. And Izuku is reminded why she's here again. I almost forgot about that, he says jokingly. But no one laughs. He doesn't miss the concerned look on her face or the worried glances teachers exchange. It's hard to forget about a second-degree burn. The old woman comments, do you mind telling me what caused this? Izuku swallows. I don't remember. This is obviously not the right thing to say, judging by the look on everyone's faces. I do remember. It's blurry. The heroine hums, but the frown remains on her face. Blurry, you say? Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain. He fumbles over his words. It just happened. Izuku knows this is not quite true, but he can't get himself to tell anyone about this yet. Saying it's his father's quirk that caused this would make them think something is wrong. And then they would worry, but it's different, and they wouldn't understand. This is not something they can help with. It would only cause more trouble, more harm than it would do good. Aizawa speaks up. You mean you got badly injured in an alley and it just happened? He deadpans. Shouta. Present Mike whisper shouts. Izuku doesn't see the expression on his homeroom teacher's face, but he can see him from the corner of his eye shrug subtly. Izuku purses his lips. Yeah, he says softly. Recovery girl continues to disinfect his arm, and Izuku thinks this is something he really could have done himself. The fire had grazed his right arm, right where his scar is, and so it didn't look too bad. Well, not worse than it had before. The compression sleeve he wears on his upper arm had taken most of the damage, but the fire had burnt through it, and so there were little pieces of fabric mingled with his damaged skin. And do you remember where you were when this happened? Recovery girl asks, continuing her series of questions. Izuku isn't stupid. Well, he is, most of the time, but he's not blind. He knows she's not asking this out of simple curiosity, no. She and his teachers probably already have their own suspicions, and now they're trying to confirm them. I don't. I was outside, he explains. There's some truth in it. He indeed was outside at some point. She frowns, this late at night. It wasn't that late, Izuku wants to say, because he's starting to get annoyed by the questions. He's still tired and he wants to sleep. I was running. Recovery girl nods once to show she's listening. Going on runs like this right before bed isn't good for you, dear, you know. Izuku hums in response, just when he thinks she's done questioning him. And where were your parents during all of this? So he is right. He doesn't know what gave him away. Usually, Izuku is good at hiding stuff from people, or so he thinks he is. And as bad as it sounds, it has become kind of a habit over the years. He doesn't know why he's so bad all of a sudden. Maybe it's because before it had only been his mother, but now he's dealing with heroes. And my mom was at work, he explains. Is it just you and your mother? She takes an antiseptic wipe and uses it to clean his wound. She passes over the area that suffered the most damage and Izuku winces. And no, he starts, well, yeah, He doesn't know what he should say and what he should keep to himself, but in the end, he lies. Like dads in America. I see. They don't talk much after that. Recovery girl packs her things a few minutes later, and when Aizawa walks her back to the door, they exchange a few words, but Izuku can't make out exactly what they're saying from his place. His teacher gives the woman her coat back, and then she leaves. Izuku is left alone with his thoughts, and he wonders if he'll be able to get out of this one. Izuku feels incredibly awkward being in his teacher's home. They're not mean or abrasive. They always speak to him in a gentler tone than what he's used to. But they're still his teachers. There haven't been many times where Izuku has had good experiences with teachers, at least not before UA. The teachers here have always treated him with kindness, but he still finds himself wary of them. He often feels guilty for it, because he's afraid they might think he doesn't appreciate them, which is not the case at all. It's simply hard to get rid of old habits. Right now is a different story though. Izuku has had no news from his mother the entire day. He gathered his courage to ask them to let him leave a few more times, tried to convince them that he was fine, but ultimately gave up after they'd answered no each time. It would make everything worse if they got angry at him because he kept annoying them, so instead, he chooses to stay quiet. Slowly, the tension leaves him, but never completely, and the guilt for being a burden remains. Nighttime approaches, and still, no news. Izuku doesn't have his phone, doesn't have anything at all except for what he's wearing. Not even his shoes. He wonders if his mother will call on his teacher's phone again. Would Aizawa even answer? Izuku feels the panic rising in his chest. What if something happens and Aizawa doesn't tell him? Well, there's no reason as to why he would do that, but Izuku can't shake the feeling off. As if on cue, Aizawa brings him a glass of water. Izuku is sitting on the couch. The television is on, but he doesn't pay much attention to it. He takes the drink and utters a small thank you. We'd let you have the guest bedroom, except it's a mess right now, so I doubt you'd want to sleep there, Aizawa starts. Will the couch do? Izuku furrows his brow. Sleep. Oh, and no, I mean yes, but I'm not spending the night here. I was just going to, He hadn't thought about what he would do after jumping out of his apartment's window. He had left all of his problems to his future self, which means present him. He had imagined he would go with his mom, but she hadn't called, and now it's dark outside. Going to? Aizawa asks, and then he sighs. If you're worried about being a burden to us, then I can assure you that's not the case. The man walks not too far away from him, and Izuku sits up to turn and look at him. Had he been this easy to read? It's true. Izuku snaps his head to look at present Mike walking past Aizawa. He's carrying a bunch of blankets in his arms. He drops everything down on the smaller couch close to the one Izuku is sitting on. It's nice to have you here, too. Thanks for a change from that grumpy one, he adds with a wink. Aizawa comes up behind the blonde and hits him with a pillow on the back of his head before throwing it gently at Izuku's feet. You love me anyway. Present Mike laughs, I guess that's true, and gives him a quick kiss. Izuku wants to tell them he should leave, that he wants to, but something stops him from doing so. He convinces himself that it's because he'd be intruding on their little interaction, but he knows this isn't entirely the truth. Pulling the pillow closer to his chest, he finds himself wanting to stay here just a bit longer. There's something strange about being somewhere with two people that love each other and somehow not feeling left out. It's selfish, but Izuku tells himself it's okay just for now. How did you two meet? He asks tentatively, "Sorry, I don't know why It's okay if you don't want to tell me, It's fine, problem child. You're allowed to ask things." Izuku relaxes at this. "We met in high school, at UA, present," Mike answers, smiling and looking fondly at his husband. They talk more, each telling their bits of the story and not seeming bothered by the freckled teen's question. It's nice, peaceful. They eventually leave and Izuku decides maybe spending another night here wouldn't be too bad after all. And again, he leaves all his issues and worries for his future self. Perhaps he will know better what to do. There's some shouting, but Izuku doesn't understand what's being said. He's running away from something terrible. He recognizes the hallway at his apartment, but he doesn't know how he got there. The corridor is long, and the glass door at the end of it seems to be unreachable. There's fire chasing him, creeping up quicker than Izuku can run. It seems like an eternity before he gets closer enough to the door. There's no handle on it to slide it open, and Izuku doesn't have time to think. He squeezes his eyes shut and then breaks the glass, sending flying millions of little shards glimmering under the moonlight. Izuku remembers jumping over the small concrete fence on the balcony before. He glances back once to look at the blazing fire and then jumps off. The drop is not like he remembers it to be. It's too slow and too fast at the same time. The fire is following after him. Still, he doesn't know what to do. And then, splash, his body hits the water, a deep ocean without a single wave, leaving the surface undisturbed. Tiny bubbles graze his cheeks and hands and legs. The fire tries to break through the water, but to no avail. It remains there, anyways, and Izuku feels himself start to run out of air. He cannot swim up to the surface, because the roaring fire waits for him there. But the heavy water dragging him down does him no better. Which is better, being burnt alive or drowning? He remembers he had been asked this as a hypothetical question before. What had he answered then? Izuku can't seem to remember. There are so many things he still wants to do. Promises he has to keep. He has to find a solution, quick. If he doesn't, he will die. His heart beats faster with each passing second. Izuku doesn't want to die. Midoriya, Izuku's eyes shoot open, and he gasps. Aizawa's hand retracts from his shoulder. Sorry, he gives the teen an apologetic look. The man hands him his phone and before Izuku can ask any questions, he says, "Your mother is on the phone." Almost instantly, Izuku feels awake. He has to stop himself from snatching the phone off of the man's hands. "Mom." He turns his head away from Aizawa. And then he hears his teacher walk to the kitchen, leaving him more privacy, which Izuku is grateful for. "Izuku." She sounds relieved at the sound of his voice, and she sounds much calmer than the day before. "I just spoke with your teacher. He sounds very kind." "Why, yeah." He glances at Aizawa, whose back is turned to him, busying himself in the kitchen. "Yeah, he is." He sits up in a more comfortable position. Did something happen?" "Why are you calling?" "After you called me yesterday. I couldn't go back to the apartment, so I went to look for somewhere we could stay until we figure things out," she says, "and I did." Izuku's eyes widen. Really? Although she can't see his face. He knows she can hear the surprise in his voice. "Gee, that's great, Mom. I got really lucky." She laughs softly. I'm glad, I really am." But he lowers his voice until it's almost a whisper. "Well, money. It won't be an issue," she reassures him. "I ran into a friend, and then we talked for a bit. When I told her about, everything, she suggested we stay at her house. I don't like depending on other people like this, but this is the best I can do for now." "I'm sorry, Izuku." No, it's fine, it's great." His mother sighs with relief. "I'll come to get you in a bit. I just need you or your teacher to send me the address." "Right." They both hang up a few minutes later. This is better than Izuku could have hoped for, but something nags at his heart. Izuku stands up on wobbly legs. Aizawa probably hears him because he turns around slightly. "Done already?" He acts like he hasn't been listening in on the conversation, but Izuku knows he has. It doesn't bother him, though. He nods. And my mom needs your address." It comes out more like a question than a statement like he had intended. But Aizawa seems to understand anyway. "I'll send it to her for you." Izuku gives him the device back. But there's a split second where he hesitates. It takes him by surprise. Didn't he want to leave? He has no idea whether his teacher noticed or not, but it won't change anything in the end even if he did. The place is comfortable, he realizes. Yes, the couch is soft and so are the blankets. But that's not what he means. Just being there, it feels nice. Waking up and staying here is scary, but leaving is even scarier. It's only later that Izuku will realize he had forgotten to ask which friend his mother was talking about. The Bakugas. Izuku squeaks out when they arrive in front of a familiar place. The house is impressive, with huge windows and beige bricks. The roof is made of a pretty teal color, and there are wooden fences surrounding it. "I ran into Mitsuki yesterday," his mother says, parking the car on the side of the road. "Isn't it nice? You'll even get to spend more time with little Katsuki. You were both such good friends when you were younger. He's in your class, isn't he?" "Yeah," he breathes out. Izuku wonders if that means Katsuki is aware of the situation and if he'll be angry at him. Maybe he'll just laugh because this is such a pathetic situation to be in. His mother still thinks they're the best of friends, close and inseparable. Well, the latter is true, in a way. Izuku has never been able to separate himself from Katsuki. They've both been in each other's life since he can remember. But it had gotten more and more complicated over the years, and it still does, but now they're able to work through it, mostly. That doesn't mean they're friends, though. Izuku doesn't know what they are. He never asked Katsuki what he thought, either. So instead, he says they're childhood friends. Izuku unbuckles his seatbelt and opens the door. He stands there, a hand placed on the top of the door, and watches the door from his place. He waits for his mother to do the same and then follows after her to the front door. Tall bushes are placed right by the road, on top of the grass that has been mowed very recently. Izuku still doesn't have any shoes, and although Aizawa had offered him some slippers, he had refused. Izuku had taken enough already. Paying everyone back for what they did to help him would already be hard enough as it is. He didn't need to add this on top of everything. 2 quick knocks, and then silence. He and his mother both wait for a few seconds, and then the door opens. Izuku sees the blonde hair first, and his mind immediately thinks this must be Katsuki, but then he sees it isn't. Izuku, been such a while since I've seen you. Mitsuki gives him a tight hug. Mitsuki-san, she pulls away. Thank you again for letting us stay here, his mother says. We're both very grateful. She bows a little and Izuku quickly does the same. It's no problem at all, Mitsuki replies. His mother bows deeper, and when Izuku turns his head slightly to look at her, he sees a tear falling from her eyes, darkening the concrete under them. I'll find a way to repay you for everything soon. Mitsuki softens, helping his mother straighten up while she rubs her eyes. We don't need anything, she says. Izuku notices Katsuki's father marching towards them. Masaru, his mind supplies. Come on, you'll both get cold outside. There's no wind, and the air isn't cold, but Izuku guesses it was only an excuse to change the subject. She ushers both of them inside and closes the door behind them. Izuku is awkward, just standing there. He has no idea what to do. Mitsuki and Masaru probably notice his lack of shoes when his mother takes hers off and he doesn't, but they stay quiet about it. Mitsuki turns, Katsuki. She shouts, startling Izuku. Come downstairs, we have guests. A minute later, there he is. Katsuki's eyes are glued on him. And Izuku wishes he could leave and hide in some place far away instead of having to face the blonde again. They hadn't talked since, and still now, they stay quiet. The adults seem oblivious to the tension between them. That, or they simply decide to ignore it. Katsuki, Masaru turns to face the blonde. Why don't you go in your room with Izuku, he suggests softly, motioning to Izuku with his head. The freckled boy expects his childhood friend to scowl, or at least show some sort of discontentment, but instead, his face remains neutral, and he nods, which might be even worse. At least, when he's angry, Izuku is able to tell what he's thinking. His mother smiles at him, telling him he can go. At that moment, Izuku wishes she could have been able to read his mind so that she could have known to ask him to stay. But she can't read his mind, and she doesn't ask him to stay, so he leaves. The walk up the stairs is silent, tense. Katsuki doesn't turn back once to look at him or make sure he's following. It feels like an eternity before they reach a room with the door wide open. Katsuki walks in first and stops after 2 steps. He reaches for the handle, and Izuku prepares himself to have the door shut in his face. Well, it's his stupid brain's fault for thinking that Katsuki would even want to talk to him, even less have him in his room. But then, Katsuki doesn't close the door. He holds it open and looks at Izuku expectantly, waiting for him to step inside. Embarrassed, Izuku feels his face heat up and he quickly makes his way inside. The room is pretty simple, not that Izuku had imagined it looking a specific way. It's bare, if anything, probably because, just like Izuku, most of his things are in the dorms. The silence is thick, and it doesn't thin. There's a clock on Katsuki's bedside table, and the ticking is the only sound filling the room. It makes Izuku even more aware of how much time is passing where neither of them speaks a single word. At some point, Katsuki had walked up to his window, while Izuku had stayed in his place, and they haven't moved since. Izuku can't take it anymore. The quiet air is too loud. He opens his mouth to speak, but Katsuki beats him to it. First, it was you acting all fucking weird at school. I know none of the other extras noticed, but I did. So I asked you, and you told me it was nothing, Katsuki says. When Izuku doesn't reply, he continues. Then your mom came here last night, but you weren't with her. So I asked the old hag about it, but she wouldn't tell me shit either. The blonde scoffs. Izuku hadn't thought about where his mother had gone to sleep last night. He had known it wasn't at their apartment, but he hadn't taken the time to think about it. Now it's you, and you're staying here apparently. Katsuki turns around, but he doesn't move from his spot. I'm not an idiot. Something's definitely wrong here, so I'm asking what it is again, and don't you dare fucking lie to me. There's a strange gentleness in the way Katsuki asks for the truth. It's obvious he had been meaning to confront Izuku with a harsher tone, but it doesn't hurt him in the slightest. His heart still clenches, and then his eyes sting. Izuku stares at the floor and purses his lips. He can't put this off any longer. He opens his mouth and lifts his head. But the moment his green irises meet ruby ones, he feels all the strength he had gathered leave him, replaced with doubt and fright. His gaze flickers back to the floor and he fiddles with his hands. He holds the tears in his eyes, and he doesn't let them fall. It's so stupid, he mumbles. But Katsuki doesn't interrupt him, doesn't move to force the words out of him. When Izuku tries another glance at him tentatively, he sees no judgment in his face. No one calls for them downstairs, and nothing happens that could potentially interfere with their conversation. Izuku takes a deep breath and empties his mind of anything else. "And my dad," Izuku stumbles over his words. His voice cracks, and it's then that Katsuki walks over to him. Izuku places a hand over his mouth to stop a sob from escaping his mouth. He shakes his head, but he doesn't know why. Katsuki stops right in front of him. "Why, you probably think that I'm pathetic." His voice is barely above a whisper. He places the heel of his palm on his closed eyelids to stop the water from escaping his eyes. He feels hands grab his wrists, but not in a forceful manner. They pull just enough so that Izuku's hands don't cover his eyes anymore. And then he sees Katsuki, his childhood friend, because that's what they are, isn't it, is looking at him softly. He finds empathy in those eyes instead of pity. "I don't," Katsuki says. And that's enough for Izuku to break. The tears he'd been trying to hold so desperately finally start to fall before his face has the chance to react. A sob gets stuck in his throat. And then the most improbable, unexpected thing to happen happens. Katsuki moves forward and wraps his arms around him. It's clumsy, and Katsuki seems unsure of what to do, but it's familiar, and Izuku wails. He cries his heart out, and now the tears won't stop. He clutches Katsuki's shirt with all his might. "Kaken." He repeats the name over and over again as if it meant a million different things, each able to express the things he can't quite put into words, and Katsuki understands them all. I can't stand up to him at all. I tried. I swear I did. I believe you. I am so scared." His voice cracks. "I'm just a coward. I couldn't be brave. I couldn't." "You're not a coward, you shitty nerd." Izuku's heart squeezes. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear this, and now, out of everyone he knows, it's Katsuki who reassures him. "Kaken." "I know," Katsuki says. "And then, things will get better and you'll be fine." Izuku sniffles, pulling back slightly. Katsuki has always been right about most things. He hopes this is one of them. He finally looks at Katsuki and asks hesitantly, "Are you sure?" And Katsuki smiles. "Yeah, it's a nice day," Izuku thinks, at least, compared to the days before this one. He had slept through most of it, but letting his feelings out and actually telling someone feels nice. There's still a weight on his heart, but somehow it feels lighter, easier to bear. Izuku spends most of the time in Katsuki's room. After his sobs turn into small hiccups, they pull back. Katsuki seems unsure as to what to do, and the puzzled look on his face makes Izuku want to laugh. It's a rare sight, an odd thing, to see his childhood friend in such a state. Kaken is always so confident normally. He can't help but think, but this isn't normally. Izuku's tears have dried and left his cheeks sticky. His throat is sore from holding back his cries, so he remains quiet. Katsuki doesn't comment on it though, which Izuku is grateful for, and instead gives him some space. "You can talk about it if you want," he says carefully after a while. Izuku shakes his head. There isn't much to say. Katsuki doesn't get mad or angry at him. He stays calm, a calm that isn't unnerving but rather soothing. Izuku feels comfortable enough to ask where the bathroom is, and the blonde tells him it's just 2 doors down the hallway. When Izuku flips the light switch on, he almost jumps. The mirror is huge, taking almost an entire wall, and right above it glares a bright light. But it's neither of those things that catch his attention the most. It's the sight of himself. A day or maybe 2 had passed since he had actually taken a good look at himself in the mirror. Of course, he had been to the bathroom in Aizawa's apartment, but he had been too distracted to notice it. The tear stains on both his cheeks and the red tint in his eyes don't do anything to help. There are faint scratches on his face that he had forgotten about, though they look paler than the last time he had seen them. The dark circles under his eyes make him look more tired than he actually feels, but thinking about it for a moment longer, Izuku realizes that he is tired. It's already noon, and he doesn't know for how long he can continue to do this, continue to feel so much with barely enough time to process anything happening. He runs his hands up his face and sets his elbows down on the counter. He then places his fingers on his temples to hold his head in place and slowly runs them down his tangled hair. It's so messy his fingers get stuck in the mass of curls. He tries to style them the best he can without any success and gives up. With a sigh, he lets his gaze fall on the marble counter. Marble, just like Aizawa and Hisashi had at their apartment. Izuku doesn't know why his thoughts keep circling back to his teachers. Yes, he can admit it was nice for a day, but when he'll go back to school, it will probably be awkward for them. Izuku shakes his head and turns on the water. He splashes some cold water on his face, hoping it'll help him look less like this. But it doesn't do anything. He still looks the same after, except now he feels cold. When he goes to leave the bathroom, he starts heading to Katsuki's room but stops himself. Does Katsuki even want to see him? The first time, he let him in because Masaru had asked him to do so, but now there was no obligation. He clenches his fist. Maybe he should just go. To go where? You can talk about it if you want, he remembers Katsuki saying. Izuku looks at the stairs leading downstairs, then back at the door to Katsuki's room and starts walking towards the ladder. When he enters, nothing happens. Katsuki is sitting at his desk now, papers laid out in front of him. He doesn't turn around when Izuku walks in, probably choosing to ignore him. You're annoying him. He ignores his thoughts and creeps closer to the other boy, making sure to make his footsteps heavier than necessary so that Katsuki won't startle if he actually didn't hear him come in. Hovering over Katsuki's shoulder, Izuku sees the sheets of paper before he understands what they are. Realization hits him, and his eyes widen. The homework, he mutters, dread laced in his voice. He had forgotten about it. Well, of course he had, with everything else going on. It had seemed so important at the time. And then other things had happened, and it wasn't his biggest concern anymore. Right now, though, he feels the exact same anxiety he had felt a few days prior coursing through his body. It's so stupid, it shouldn't matter so much, but it does anyway. Katsuki scoffs. You didn't do it yet, shitty nerd. And no, Izuku replies, I couldn't. He trails off. He doesn't move for a few seconds, and then he opens his mouth again. Do you think I could? 2 quick knocks on the doorframe stop him halfway through his sentence, and both teens turn their heads in direction of the noise. It's Mitsuki. The corner of her lips turns up and she clicks her tongue, just like Katsuki always does. Only you would do your homework while we have guests, brat. The words are spoken with surprising fondness. Katsuki doesn't say anything, simply rolls his eyes and turns back to his work. The woman switches her gaze to look at Izuku and her eyes soften. She opens her mouth and closes it. And then a moment later she opens it again. Dinner will be ready soon. Izuku gives her a quick nod in response. Mitsuki begins to leave but turns around before she even takes a single step. Oh, and Izuku. The freckled teen's head snaps up at the mention of his name. She hesitates again before speaking. Your mom wants to talk to you, she says. Izuku frowns. Talk to him about what? Maybe she has good news, he wants to believe, but with everything happening recently, he knows not to let himself hope too much. A minute or two later, he follows Katsuki downstairs. It's a nice day. Katsuki's house is bigger than Izuku had remembered it to be. The tall windows leave space for sunlight to filter inside the place, and every object looks as if it had been thoughtfully placed. Izuku's mother is over there by the couch. She smiles and starts walking toward him. Katsuki looks back at him before going to sit at the table. Izuku, I need to talk to you, she says. He catches Mitsuki staring, and the moment their eyes meet, she looks away. I know. His mother puts on a serious face. We need to go back to the apartment. What? He says louder than he had intended. And then he lowers his voice so it's just above a whisper. Why? There are some important things I need to go grab, and I can't carry it all on my own. It irritates Izuku in a way that takes even him by surprise. Can it wait? We just got here. What's so important that we need to go now? Izuku. She speaks his name as if he was the irrational one. School starts again in 2 days, and you don't have your uniform, nor any of your things. For God's sake, you don't even have shoes. She takes his forearms in her hands and squeezes them lightly. Plus, your father probably won't be home until later, so it's best we do it now and be done with it. He hates that she's right. He understands what his mother is telling him. And yes, it's true, but still. I know that I've asked a lot from you already, but this is the last thing, I promise. Izuku purses his lips, and after a moment, okay, he lets the word tumble out of his mouth along with his hope to have one single day where nothing comes to ruin it. It was a nice day, but now it's over. Because of course it is. There's no way Izuku can ever have a day that's simply nice from beginning to end. It's always little bits and sparks of joy, here and there, scattered everywhere. His mother smiles and they agree to leave after dinner. The food is good, it's amazing, even, but the thought of eating too much makes him feel sick. Izuku eats as much as he can because he doesn't want to seem rude, but at some point, he simply can't swallow any more food. They try to help with the dishes, but Masaru tells them that he'll take care of it. Izuku doesn't want to leave so soon, but he has no reason to stay. He insists they can help with something, anything. But again, no one hears the silent plead in his voice, and so he leaves. The ride in the car is silent. Izuku feels so much, but he doesn't know what to say, or how to say what he thinks. He's angry, and he's frustrated and scared and sad, so many emotions felt at once. He tries to think of exactly why he feels that way, but his mind is all over the place and every train of thought gets lost too quickly. His mother doesn't speak a word either. When Izuku turns to her, he knows she wants to say something. He can tell by the look on her face, but she stays quiet. Izuku's frustration englobes everything else he feels, and it keeps growing in his chest until he feels as if it might burst. Every minute that passes is an opportunity for his mind to supply more reason to feel this way, and it eventually becomes too much. "You always do this," he whispers under his breath. His mother throws a glance his way, furrowing her brows. "What? You always do this," Izuku repeats, a little harsher this time. He stares out the window and they stop at a red light, even though the streets are empty. "What do you mean, do what?" she questions, confusion clear in her voice. "This." He moves his hands in front of him as if the thin air could mean something. "You. Whenever I get comfortable somewhere, you take me away, or you just—" Izuku turns his head abruptly to look at her. "You ruin it." His mother's shoulders stiffen, and she squeezes the steering wheel a little harder. Izuku doesn't take his eyes off of her. He feels a bit guilty now after having said it out loud, but he brushes it away. He's too angry right now. Izuku looks down to his lap and fumbles with the fabric of his shorts. "First when you picked me up from the dorms a week ago, and then home became hell, and after that, it was my teacher's home, who were nicer to me than you ever were." His chest tightens. He knows he's being unfair, but he needs to tell her all this. "And now we find somewhere, and you do it again." But then Izuku sees her glassy eyes, and he wishes he would have just stayed quiet. God, why does he keep doing this? "Izuku, if I had known I would have." "What?" He cuts her off, frustrated. "What would you have done? You did know, I told you. I really tried to tell you." His eyes start to sting, and now his voice is back to being just barely above a whisper. "But you chose to believe his word over mine, and that hurt me in a way you can't seem to understand." His mother inhales sharply. The air is so thick it's hard to breathe, and the tense silence only makes it all feel 100 times heavier. "I'm sorry," she says at last. "I don't forgive you." She doesn't speak another word for the rest of the ride. Neither does he, of course. He wipes the tear in his eye with his thumb before it has the chance to fall. Izuku kind of wishes he would have waited until they were someplace where he would be able to do a dramatic exit and not have to suffer this awkward moment. Izuku doesn't regret what he said, though. It had been building up in his chest for so long now. He keeps thinking of things he should have added whilst he was listing all the things troubling him, but now he keeps his lips tightly shut. The truth is that it had started much earlier than a week ago. With the dorm system, for example, when she had decided he wouldn't go back to UA. Luckily, All Might had talked her out of it, but still, he had never managed to completely forget about it. His mother pulls up in their usual parking spot. Izuku doesn't wait too long before unbuckling his seatbelt and stepping outside. He still waits for her, because even though he's mad, he doesn't want to leave her alone like this. They walk up the stairs, and it feels like an eternity before they finally reach the 6th floor. Except that now that they're here, Izuku starts to wonder if his father will really be gone. A voice at the back of his head keeps saying, "But what if he's not?" He doesn't take any chance, reaching for the doorknob before his mother can. If the man really is there, he doesn't want his mother to be the first to see him. He turns it in. It's locked. Well, obviously. Izuku feels his face turn red, and when he glances at his mother, she lifts up a key. The boy steps aside a bit and lets her unlock the door. He reassures himself that he'll just step inside quickly if something happens. The woman opens the door slowly, but it's too dark to see anything inside. She takes a step forward, just enough so that she's able to reach for the light switch. She turns it on, and when nothing happens, they both let out a breath of relief. Oh, Izuku thinks she probably was worried as well. She must have been just as anxious as him, probably even more. Being worried is kind of her thing, after all. He doesn't want to admit it, but Izuku feels guilty now to have said all those things to his mother, now of all times. It's fine, he'll apologize later when all this is over. Let's be quick, only bring what's important, all right. The faster we do this, the sooner we can leave. Her voice is soft, gentle. He wonders how she's not getting mad at him. She should be mad at him, scream even. Izuku wouldn't blame her if she did. He swallows before nodding, not quite meeting her eyes. Izuku spots his backpack first. It's right there, resting against the wall of the entryway. Every little pocket is open, and he frowns. He never lets his bag open. He always takes extra care to make sure everything is in the right place. It takes him a moment to realize it's probably his father who had gone through his things, and that's probably how he had found his teacher's number. Stepping forward, he goes to grab his backpack and look if anything else might be missing. It'd be bad if his father had taken one of his notebooks or destroyed his things for whatever reason. But then, something else a bit further away catches his eye. Tiny specks of blood on the floor are what he sees first. But then his gaze travels up and he notices the burnt corner of the couch, with fabric that was once green and now charred forever in some places, with brown edges where the fire had stopped. The spot just behind where he had been standing just 2 nights before is just as in bad condition. The wall's paint layer has been turned to ashes, and what remains has crumpled on the floor, leaving the layer behind the paint visible. That's not everything though. The whole place looks like a mess, definitely worse than when he had left. Was it? A voice in his mind provides. Well, he doesn't know for sure, his memory is still fuzzy about everything that's happened. His mother is there, but she walks past the burnt furniture and the objects scattered everywhere. There's no way she doesn't notice it, but he still asks himself whether she does when she simply heads for her bedroom. Izuku quickly grabs the straps of his backpack and heads to his room, giving one last glance at his mother. He sees her take out a bag and put a few items in it, so he lets her be. Entering his room, he picks up his ruined homework on the floor. He lets his backpack slide down his arm and onto the floor before placing the sheet inside. Well, maybe he'll find a way to complete it, somehow. It's only now he notices just how dirty he is. He feels embarrassed to have shown up at Aizawa's apartment in Katsuki's house like this. He changes his shorts for some beige ones and puts the shirt he's wearing in the trash can. He puts on a plain black one instead and doesn't bother bringing another one. He'll be back to the dorms in a few days and most of his clothes are there anyway. He takes his school uniform and stuffs it in his backpack, not caring that it'll be all rumpled an hour from now. Izuku's heart is racing, and his hands are trembling. He knows he has to be quick, but he can't help but wonder what'll happen if his father comes back before they're done. He goes to the bathroom to take his things, but then he sees his mother is already there. He stands in the doorframe and waits until she packs everything. Among the things his mother is bringing, there's a small metal compartment for candies he used to eat when he was younger with All Might's smiling face on it. Izuku wonders why she still has that, but then she opens it and he sees money bills folded neatly in half in the square box. Well, that makes sense, but it's still unexpected. Though, not as unexpected as when she closes it and hands it to him. "Can you keep this for me?" she asks. "I don't have any more space left." Izuku sees that her smaller bag is still half empty, and the compartment would probably be small enough to fit in her pockets. But he doesn't argue. He takes it and puts it in his front pocket. They silently exchange a look that says they're both ready to go, so they leave. Izuku puts on his shoes that were sitting at the entrance and takes care to close the light before stepping out. His mother locks the door again, and it's as though they had never been there. The walk down the stairs takes them a lot less time than the walk up, and soon they're back to the car. They put everything in the backseat and then buckle their seatbelts. Izuku lets out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. It's done now. They managed to get everything they needed without having a disaster happening. He reminds himself he has to apologize to his mother once they get back to Katsuki's house. His mother starts the car and then she turns to him. "Let's talk." When we get there, Izuku is about to turn his head to look at her, but right when they're about to exit the parking lot, they almost run into someone. "Mom," she breaks abruptly. Izuku is about to reach for his seatbelt and go ask if the person is okay when "Hisashi," his mother mumbles, so low Izuku almost misses it. He blinks and then his eyes widen. He hears the car doors lock with a click. And then his father approaches his mother's side of the car. The noise can hardly pass through the thick glass, but he can still hear the man call out his mother's name as he leans on the car. She rolls down her window the tiniest bit, just enough to hear what the man has to say. "Mom," he repeats, his gaze flickering between his mother and the man who's supposed to be his father. She holds her hand up slightly, telling him to wait. "Inko," the man sounds out of breath like he had run a lot. His hair is all disheveled, and he's wearing a fancy suit with the blazer missing. His tie is loose, and the top button of his white shirt is undone. "Please, I have nothing to say to you, Hisashi," she says coldly. "We're leaving." His father's gaze switches to look at him. It's like the man hadn't noticed Izuku was there before now. He continues to stare for a few seconds as if what he was seeing didn't make any sense. And then he shakes his head and he turns back to his mother. "Inko," he repeats, "don't leave me again." "You're the one who left," she says almost in a whisper. No, you know I didn't mean to," he replies. He sounds desperate, and Izuku almost feels bad for him. "But no, not after everything. I'm not staying with you, Hisashi." "So what?" he replies harshly. "Why, you're just going to leave? You'd leave me all for that pathetic, quirkless child?" It hits more than Izuku would like to admit. He's not quirkless anymore, but right now it feels as though he still was. "That child you speak of is my child, and I'll always choose him over you." There's anger in her tone, and it's enough to make his father speechless. He just stares in silence. The time keeps stretching, and then he hits the window. It's not enough to have it break, but it still startles his mother all the same. The man hits again, and his mother starts fumbling with the gear shift. On the fourth hit, the window breaks, and little shards go flying in their direction. His mother starts the car, not caring, or simply too scared to care, that the man is still holding onto the car. He tries to grab his mother and Izuku can do nothing but watch. She hits her husband with enough force that he lets go and falls on the road. Izuku turns around in his seat to watch the man through the window at the back, and then after a moment, he sits back down. He wants to say something, anything, but he doesn't know what. He swallows. "Mom, it's fine," she answers before he can say anything else. "We don't have to talk about it now." "What do you mean it's fine? Do you think what happened was just fine?" She turns to him, and he looks at her, really looks at her, at how tired her eyes seem. "Izuku, not now." Maybe that's why he doesn't see it until it's too late. That blazing light heading straight towards them. It's not fine, he shouts, and it's only when they hear the sound of a horn that his eyes finally catch the bright light which keeps getting closer, too close. It's like everything is in slow motion, but even then it's too fast for him to have the time to do anything. Izuku turns back to his mother. He opens his mouth and then darkness. There's nothing for an instant. Maybe it only lasts for a few seconds, or maybe it lasts a minute or 5. Izuku doesn't know. And suddenly, there's static in Izuku's ears and some other noise farther away behind it. Izuku feels tired. He wants to keep sleeping, so he ignores it. But it keeps getting louder. It's been a while since Izuku has last had such good sleep. He doesn't want it to end now. His head feels so heavy. He tries to ignore all the noise, but then he feels something grab his arm. Izuku moves his limb, but it's surprisingly heavy, and he drops it back down right away. Someone's calling out his name, he realizes. He hums weakly in response. Maybe once he answers, the voice will leave him alone. A hand jerks his arm slightly, and then urgently. The voice keeps repeating his name over and over again until he finally understands to who the voice belongs. Mom. He cracks one eye open and shrieks back when he notices a bright light in front of them. He doesn't recognize where they are, and his heart rate starts to get faster. The words are hard to make, so he doesn't try to speak too much. Izuku turns his head and sees his mother there, lying right beside him. Izuku, she says and smiles weakly. He remembers immediately what just happened, or understands. There was a van coming right their way, and it was on the wrong side of the road. No, that's not quite right. They were the ones on the wrong side of the road. His mother had been so tired. And then she had drifted off to the side, just enough so that the side of the car came in contact with the other vehicle. That's probably around when Izuku had blacked out because he doesn't remember much after that. It takes a moment for Izuku to understand they're not laying down. The car has been flipped over and now they are both kept upside down because of their seatbelts. He focuses his gaze on his mother's face and sees her smile crack as a tear escapes her eye. There are little cuts on each side of her face, with tiny shards of glass sticking on the bloodier spots. A broken sob escapes her lips. It's not the first time Izuku hears her cry, but this one is different, and the sound makes his heart twist. Mom, he asks, his voice raspy. His heartbeat gets faster and faster with each passing moment. Mom, what's wrong? What a stupid thing to ask. Everything is wrong right now, has been wrong for a while now, but this seems so much worse in comparison to everything that's happened before. Izuku, I'm so glad, she breathes out. She keeps weeping quietly, and Izuku struggles to unbuckle his seatbelt. He hits his head on the bottom, the top, of the car with a thud, making him dizzy. The pain barely registers as he tries to get into a more comfortable position. The remaining pieces of glass cut through the skin on his palm, and he thinks he must have hurt his leg as well, but none of it matters when he sees it. Izuku's eyes widen, and then he begins to panic, truly panic, his heart beating so fast it might burst straight out of his chest. The pounding in his head does nothing to help. His mother's hand is stained crimson after she lifts it off her stomach only to reveal even more blood. The window had shattered after the impact, and now a bigger chunk of glass is embedded in her skin. Oh my god, all of Izuku's training suddenly just goes out the window, just like that. He had been prepared for situations like this. He was supposed to be ready. He thought he was, but right now he's terrified, and he doesn't even try smiling for his mother. Instead, it's her who tries to comfort him. It's okay, she says, as though she means it. No, it's not. Izuku reaches for his shirt with trembling hands and tugs hard until it rips. He takes a piece of the black fabric and presses it around the wound where the blood is seeping because it seems like it's the right thing to do. It's the only thing he can do. Please, don't say it's fine, he whispers. His vision gets blurry, and he tries to blink away the tears in his eyes. His mother's back is against the ground where the glass had been before, and her seatbelt is undone, probably from when he was still unconscious. Izuku lets his head fall on top of his mother's arm. She wraps her forearm around his neck and gently brings her other hand to stroke his hair. Izuku's shoulders shake as he weeps, his eyes pressed against the crook beside her shoulder. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It's okay, she answers, passing her fingers through his curls like they're not all tangled up. A mixture between a laugh and a sob gets stuck in his throat because a part of him does find comfort in hearing his mother telling him that it's okay, even though it isn't. Listen to me, Izuku. She lets out a wet cough and Izuku pulls back. You can do anything you set your mind to, you hear me? She lets her hand fall from his shoulder to his hand and squeezes it gently. So you go out there and become the best hero you can be, okay? No, you can't go yet. You have to be here. You need to stay. Izuku's breathing is ragged. I need you here. I'm not leaving you. Why, yes you are. His mother wipes the tear rolling down his cheek with her thumb. I'll always be here. Do you promise? I promise. His gaze flickers down to the ripped piece of shirt and he exhales a shaky breath. The black fabric is wet from being soaked in blood. And when he slightly pulls his hand back, there's blood smeared all over his palm. I'll find help, okay? You just have to hang on. Izuku looks around for the first time. But it's already dark outside, except for the bright light of the truck a bit farther away. He wonders if the other conductor is all right. It wouldn't do much to go check to make sure right now though. He needs to call an ambulance, or else he's just risking everyone's lives. Izuku reaches for his pocket for his phone and remembers it's not there. But he brought his backpack. Izuku takes his mother's hand, which is still holding his, and brings it to her stomach so she can be the one to put pressure on the wound. He then quickly moves on all four to the back seats and reaches for his backpack, tiny shards of glass poking his skin. He grits his teeth. He has to focus on his current task, dragging his bag towards him. Izuku quickly opens the pocket where he normally keeps his phone, and luckily, it's there. The first thing he notices is the cracks on the device. The damage isn't too bad, so he clicks on the home button, only for the screen to remain pitch black. Izuku would rather go back to sleep than keep looking for a solution. He feels tired, but he knows that if he does so, he might never wake up. Would that be so bad? He ignores the voice in his head and turns back to his mother. He can see her try to control her breathing and remain calm, despite everything happening. Hello, someone not too far away calls. Izuku snaps his head to look in the direction of the new sound. Footsteps are approaching, and with them a blurry figure, but the bright light stops Izuku from seeing anything clearly. Slowly, the form starts to take the shape of a man. Everyone all right? Izuku freezes for a moment. And then, breaking out of his thoughts, he gets closer to the front of the car. We need an ambulance, he shoots back louder. He tries to sound calm, and it doesn't seem to work, because the man stops in his tracks. Shit, the man is close enough now that Izuku can see his features. He must be in his 40s if not older, and he has a frightened look on his face, but he doesn't appear to be hurt. Okay, I'll be right back. He turns around and dials a number on his phone. Izuku sighs with relief and uses the back of his hand to wipe away the sweat on his forehead. It's all right now, help is coming. He can't help the way the corner of his lips turns up. His mother looks calmer now as well. Let's go back home, Mom. She doesn't answer, and Izuku thinks she might be a bit too calm, too still. Mom, he nudges her arm. Her hand slides down from her stomach. Mom, his voice is so quiet, as if he just wanted to see if she were asleep. Izuku retracts his hand and feels his throat close up. Time slows, but he just stands there. His vision is clear, sharp, and a strange sense of calm fills him. It's not so much calm as it is numbness. He sees the world around it, but it's confusing and he doesn't feel a thing except for the need to get out of here. Izuku grabs his bag and exits through the broken front window. He sits in front of the car that has been flipped over and waits. Maybe if he stays there long enough he'll see his mother get up as well and then they can leave. It's so cold outside he's shivering. His legs, his arms, and everything else hurts, and he wants to leave, but he has no clue what to do other than stay here, so that's what he does. At one point he thinks someone starts talking to him. They speak with the same tone they might use to describe how their day was going, as if everything was so normal. They took his mother, but he can't see where they're taking her. Izuku doesn't have the strength to move a single muscle. Someone, a different person, it seems, but Izuku can't tell, puts a blanket on his shoulders. The same person flashes a bright light in his eyes and a pair of hands keep his head upright. Then he's pushed down onto something soft, and they remove the blanket to replace it with a different one. Izuku feels panic rise in his chest. What are they doing? He's supposed to stay here until help gets there for his mother. Why aren't they helping her? Wait. They place an oxygen mask on his face and Izuku reaches to take it off. He tries to tell them he doesn't need it, but his words are sluggish. They're moving, he thinks. There are more lights than earlier, and each is too bright for Izuku's liking. And then they slow. Midoriya. Izuku turns his head to the side to see someone wearing a beige coat coming his way. The man stops beside him and the people who are pushing him in what Izuku guesses is a stretcher. Sakachi, you might remember me, we met before. Izuku nods hesitantly. Of course he remembers. One of the paramedics turns to face the detective and speaks in a low voice, but Izuku hears anyway. This is the first time he's responsive. Sakachi doesn't take his eyes off of him, and Izuku sees the worry behind his expression. And my mom, she. The man hesitates. They're taking care of her. Izuku knows something is off. Everything seems off. The detective grabs the side of the stretcher. Listen, I can't stay for too long, but is there someone I could call for you? Izuku's mind is still fuzzy, and it's hard to think about anything. He understands the question, but he doesn't know what to say. He can't say his mother, because she's already here with him. He's about to shake his head to deny the offer when he remembers. I won't push you to tell me anything, but if you ever do want some help, I'll be here. Aizawa, he answers. He hopes it's all right because he can't think of anyone else at all. Fortunately, Tsukachi gives him a quick smile and nods. Izuku lets himself be carried away and closes his mind from the world surrounding him. A phone call could be many things. It could be a survey, or Shota's landlord calling to tell him the water is going to be bad for the next few days. Shota is usually annoyed when it's those kinds of calls, but he's also relieved, because a phone call could be good news as much as it could be bad news. And over the years, Shota has had many of both. So when his phone starts buzzing while he and Hisashi are washing the dishes after having had dinner late, he already knows it won't be a pleasant phone call. Shota exchanges a worried glance with Hisashi and dries his hand on the towel before taking the device laying on the counter to see who's calling. Who is it? Hisashi asks behind him. Shota knits his brows. Tsukachi, he answers. At the moment, there's no big mission going on that he's a part of, nor any investigation he's working on. He's not sure what this could be, and something churns in his stomach because of it. He doesn't lose more time pondering on it and presses the green button. Hello, Aizawa. The man breathes out on the other end. Tsukachi, is something wrong? He hears voices in the background, many of them. Tsukachi says something to one of them, but the sound is muffled. You got a student named Midoriya, right? Shouta's eyes widen and he turns back to Hisashi, who must have overheard because he's beside him in an instant. Yeah, what about him? He tries to remain calm, but he knows if Tsukachi is there, it can't mean anything good. Look, the detective searches for his words. There's no easy way to say this, but there was a car accident. It takes Shota a moment to understand the meaning of what Tsukachi just said. A car accident? Yes, Shota passes a hand through his hair, bringing back a few strands of hair. It keeps his gaze on the counter. He doesn't want to see the look on Hisashi's face. Midoriya, is he? He's all right, he starts. Well, physically speaking. Shota frowns. What does that mean? The mother was pronounced dead at the scene. And Midoriya is being taken to the hospital right now, he explains. I'm answering what I can right now and then I'll go question any witness there was. Why are you telling me all this? Shota is grateful, but he can't help but wonder. Either Tsukachi is feeling unusually nice today, which is unlikely, or there's a more rational explanation. He asked that I give you a call. Are you sure? Is what Shota wants to ask, but he doesn't. He's torn between being happy that Midoriya finally trusted him enough to call, and being sad that he only did because, well, there was no one else. Which hospital? Is what he settles on instead. Yusutafu General. Thank you, Tsukachi. And then they hang up. Shota turns around to see Hisashi leaning against the counter, one hand over his mouth. They stare at each other for a few seconds before his husband breaks into tears. Shota goes up to him and takes him in his arms. Hisashi has always been like this, crying about other people's pain, and Shota has always made sure to be there to comfort him whenever that happened. They have each other, but right now there's a child who has no one. You go start the car, I'll grab my things, and then we can take off, Shota says after things have calmed down. And Hisashi nods. Shota goes to grab a few things, his capture weapon for one, and then puts on his shoes as fast as he can. He takes his black coat hanging on one of the hooks in the entry and opens the door. His hands are shaking because he's trying to go too fast. And he almost gives up on locking the door after fumbling with the key for a few seconds. He breathes and then inserts the small piece of metal into the lock before turning. After this is done, he rushes down the flight of stairs to reach their car, where Hisashi is already waiting for him. The moment he closes the door, the blonde takes off. It takes every last bit of his rational mind for Shota to remain calm, or not tell Hisashi to burn red lights when no one else is around. They get there, eventually. He remembers the ride being shorter than that, but it doesn't matter now. Hisashi drops him off in front of the emergency unit, letting him go ahead while he parks the car, and Shota gives him a quick kiss before leaving. He storms inside and a couple of heads turn his way. He doesn't waste them, going up directly to the front desk and pushing past someone who had just stood up after having their number called. Do you have someone named Midoriya? Midoriya Izuku. He's supposed to be here. If it weren't for the glass separating him and the receptionist, he's sure she'd be running the other direction, judging by the look on her face. There's a security guard not too far eyeing him. Shota needs to calm down. He must look like a fucking psycho right now. The woman pushes her glasses up her nose and clears her throat. I'm sorry, sir, but you'll have to wait until we call you. She prints a tiny piece of paper with a number on it and slides it toward Shota through the small hole in the glass. I don't have time for that, Shota answers, every ounce of patience he had left gone. Please, I just need a room number. She stares at him for a moment longer and then, unexpectedly, she half sits up from her office chair to look behind him at the waiting room. There aren't too many people that the place is crowded, but enough that it might take a few hours before his number is called. She purses her lips and then looks back at him. Their eyes meet and she sighs. She looks through her computer and types a few things before looking back at him. He can only see family at the moment, and someone has already been contacted. Unless you're certain. She scans her computer, looking for something. Midoriya Hisashi, then I'll need an identity piece, and if not, well, I'm sorry, you'll have to come back later. She looks very apologetic, but what she doesn't know is how stubborn he can be at times. An idea pops into his head, and he feels stupid for not thinking about it before. I'm a pro hero. The lady behind the glass looks skeptical, most likely because he doesn't look like one. He reaches for his hero license and slides it on the counter toward the woman, giving back the small piece of paper with it. She takes it, anyway, looks up at him to compare the photo on the card, and then gives it back. She hesitates, but after a few seconds, she finally tells him the room number. It's on the 6th floor, right corridor. Shouta takes back his license and gives her a quick thanks before walking past the police officer and to the elevator. It takes less than 2 minutes before he finally finds the door he's looking for. He stops, and he braces himself for whatever is going to happen next. Izuku's eyelids feel terribly heavy as he slowly forces them to open. He's not even sure his eyes are open until his vision adjusts to the darkness of the room. He's lying on his side, and there's a window about 5 feet away from him. It's slightly open, just enough to hear the droplets of water hitting the ground rapidly outside, and to let a fresh breeze inside. The recent events come back to him in an instant. Izuku read about this before. People either forgetting an entire experience or remembering every detail of it vividly. He's unlucky enough to fall into the latter category. There was blood, so much of it, everywhere. He can still feel the sticky liquid on his hands trickling down his arms. Can still remember the way his mother's eyes had lost their light before he could even really understand what was happening. She had looked so tired. I'm not leaving you, she had said, I promise. Izuku's head throbs and he turns around to lie on his other side. He knows he's not at home or in his dorm, but he has been here enough times before to know this is the hospital. The window on the door lets through a warm light from the corridor outside. It's bright and does nothing to help his headache, but Izuku doesn't look away. Something else catches his sight and makes him freeze in place. Izuku is used to waking up alone in the hospital. Sometimes, his mother was able to visit him, but being a nurse, she often had to take care of other patients, and he couldn't be one of them. But tonight is not one of those times, because there's someone else in the room. And it's not his mother, nor his friends. It's problem child, Sensei. Izuku hadn't noticed his teacher wake up. Or was he awake this whole time? On the chair beside him. Len, what are you doing here? The man is sitting in a black plastic chair, a dark coat sticking to it after being squashed under Aizawa's weight. There's no way it's comfortable. And it probably isn't, judging by the way his teacher winces as he sits up properly. He props his elbows on his tights and clasps his hands together. Do you remember what happened? Aizawa asks instead of answering his question. Yes, Izuku swallows the lump forming in his throat and sits up, the fast movement making his head spin. My mom, she was with me. He looks straight into his teacher's eyes. Is she all right? Can I see her? Aizawa gives him a sad, tired look. I'm sorry, kid. The news doesn't hit Izuku as hard as he thought it would. He doesn't feel anything at first, so he thinks he's fine. But that can't be right. He should feel something, sadness or even anger, but doesn't. Even though he understands what his teacher just told him, it doesn't make sense. Oh, he whispers. Maybe it's because he's fine with it. He searches into Aizawa's eyes as though they might tell him how he should feel, but they simply stare back at him with a comforting calm. They watch each other like this in silence for a few minutes. But Izuku's mind is elsewhere. He thinks of all the things he loves to do with his mother, and he realizes that from now on he can only speak of those in the past tense. He remembers all those mean, terrible things he had said to her right before, and how he'd been too stubborn to apologize then. Izuku will never get to tell her how he didn't mean those words, how they kept falling out of his mouth and he couldn't stop after he'd started. I was so horrible to her, Sensei, Izuku says, and he doesn't even feel the burning tingle in his eyes before a tear rolls down his cheek and a broken sob escapes his throat. I didn't apologize. I didn't mean what I said. Arms wrap around him gently and Izuku lets himself be held. He doesn't have the strength to push him away. Izuku's breath comes out ragged as his heart becomes overwhelmed with guilt. He remembers the first night Hisashi had come back, and how Izuku had messed up from the very beginning. If you don't like him, that's fine, his mother had said. But I still love him, so don't say all those things about him. Izuku wants to blame his father, but it could have been avoided if he'd just kept his mouth shut that one time. And no, it's not. It happened at the restaurant. He had stumbled over his words. He told me that he didn't like me, and then when we were paying, and this other time. First when you picked me up from the dorms a week ago, and then home became hell, and after that, it was my teacher's home, who were nicer to me than you ever were, and now we find somewhere, and you do it again. And that one, too. So of course, he feels guilt. Guilt for having said all those horrible things. He hadn't known then that these were to be the last words he would ever speak to her. But even more, he feels guilt for all the things he didn't do or say. He didn't keep his mouth shut. And really that could have been enough to stop all of this from happening. If he'd kept quiet from the very beginning, his mother would have stayed happy. His father wouldn't have gotten violent with him. No one would have been worried. Not Aizawa, nor Kaken. Sensei, I didn't know. If he had, he wouldn't have done any of it. He tries to picture himself back in Katsuki's house and then telling his mother to get some rest for the night instead of following her blindly into the car. Let's go back home tomorrow, he would have said. She was so tired. Her eyes I shouldn't have let her drive. I should have. You couldn't have done anything. Aizawa replies as if it was obvious, just a simple fact of life. These kinds of things ... they happen. He puts his hands on Izuku's shoulders and lowers his neck so his eyes are on the same level as him, and you can't blame yourself for them. They shouldn't happen, Izuku retorts. He knows his teacher is right. And if he were in the man's shoes right now, he would probably say the same thing. But would he actually mean it, or would they be empty words meant to bring comfort? I know. There's a weight on Izuku's heart, a heavy one. But he feels like Aizawa is being honest with him, so it doesn't get any heavier or lighter. There's something about everyone telling him things will be fine, and then those things doing the exact opposite and getting worse instead. Aizawa hasn't told him things would be fine, that everything is okay, and strangely, Izuku finds solace in it. I'm sorry. He repeats it over and over again like it makes any difference. It doesn't, but Izuku needs someone to know that he is sorry, that he will probably never stop being sorry. It's not like there's a letter that his mother had left him telling him that she forgives him for everything, or that she hates him and wishes he'd never been here. Izuku was wrong earlier. His problems didn't begin a week or so ago. It was long before that. They began the moment he was born, and then they simply kept appearing. The time the doctor told them he wouldn't get a quirk, every time he came home with new bruises and hid them from his mother, the time he failed to do so, when he got into UA. Life is kind of like a wave that one needs to follow and float atop of. It's important to keep going because looking back means getting stuck underwater. Izuku has been under for a while now, and he still doesn't know how to swim back up. She apologized when she didn't need to, and I didn't forgive her. Izuku's head hurts badly now, and he's not sure whether it's from the accident or all the thoughts swarming his mind. How am I supposed to tell her I changed my mind? Please, I need her to know I'm sorry. Aizawa stays quiet, but it just makes Izuku cry harder. He needs the man to say something. He needs to hear him say how much Izuku has messed up, how this is all his fault. But still, he says nothing. Izuku feels worn out, but the tears don't stop. Kind of like a colorful shirt that's been washed too many times, so now it's just sad and dull. The room is silent except for the small hiccups coming from the freckled boy. Aizawa holds him, but Izuku doesn't feel anything except for the certainty that things can never get better from now. Being in the hospital isn't the worst thing in all of this, but Izuku is starting to think it might make it into the top 5. As it turns out, he'd been sleeping for 2 days when he first woke up. The doctor told him he had a mild concussion, but other than that and a few bruises and cuts, he was in good condition. The nurse had said that it was a miracle he didn't suffer more damage from the accident. Still, they'd decided to put an IV in his arm to administrate some painkillers. A miracle. Is that really how everyone sees it? Izuku doesn't need a broken arm or a missing eye to prove this has hurt him more than anything else. His mother is gone. Shouldn't it be enough? Now, he's still in the hospital, but he's alone. School had started again today, and his teachers had classes to teach. Well, that's not entirely true. Present Mike had gone back, and Aizawa had stayed, even though Izuku had assured him he would be fine on his own. The man had left the room a minute to get himself some coffee. There's a quick knock on the door, making it open slightly with a creak. Izuku turns, wondering how Aizawa could have been so fast. But when the door opens wide, he sees it's not his teacher. It's the last person on earth he would rather see right now. Dad. The word feels weird on his tongue, and it reminds him of the last time he'd said it. He shakes the memory away. His father looks awful. His hair is disheveled. His curls even messier than Izuku's, who hasn't taken a shower for the past few days, which tells him the man probably hasn't either. He's still wearing his stupid work outfit, with his white shirt and loose tie. The only difference about his clothes since the last time he's seen him is the dirt on the front of his shirt and the yellow stains on the cuffs. It makes Izuku wonder if the man even has any other outfit, or if he just likes the comfort of it, like he was still in America with a job and a peaceful life. He guesses, in a way, it's something they both have in common, wishing he was away. Even more disturbing is the look on his face. It's like he's looking right through Izuku. The teen doesn't miss the way the man clutches his side and favors his right leg. Suddenly, the image of the man rolling on the ground after his mother had taken off with the car comes back to him. He had been wearing the same thing then, Izuku thinks. It's hard to remember. Izuku, his father's eyes open like he'd just noticed he was there. Izuku, I was looking for you. He smiles, but not a happy to see you kind of smile, and Izuku doesn't know what it is, but he knows he hates it. What are you doing here? Izuku leans his head back, pushing the covers off of him slowly and bringing one knee closer to his stomach. He keeps staring at his father, and the more he does it, the more unnerving the situation becomes. I was really hurt to learn I'm not one of your emergency contacts. His father fakes a pained expression. So I didn't know where you and your mother has gone until yesterday. Well, it turns out it wasn't very far, he scoffs. He closes the door behind him before reaching for the chair right by the door and slumps into it. Izuku wants to tell him to leave, wants to tell him a million things, but he simply glares instead. His father doesn't seem to notice it though, and if he does, he probably chooses to ignore it. I saw it on TV, the accident and everything. He continues, they didn't mention a name, but I knew that it had to be you and your mother. Well, he laughs dryly, only you. Izuku purses his lips. He had asked to be discharged this morning, right before President Mike left, so that he would be able to go to school and avoid worrying his friends or raising suspicions. The doctors and his teachers had agreed on tomorrow, just to make sure everything was all right for him to go back to the dorms and rest. Now, he wishes he had insisted more. I only had to tell them I was your father, showed them my ID, and they let me see you. That easy. There's no one else in the room, it's just the two of them. He wants to know why his father came back, why he decided to come to see him if he never wanted anything to do with Izuku in the first place. He manages to narrow all his questions down to a simpler one. Why are you here? The man speaks as though he was talking about the weather. Straight to the point, huh? When Izuku doesn't answer, he sighs. Well, as it turns out, being a single parent and having to take care of a child in Japan does come with some financial benefits, so you're just here for the money. Izuku whispers, You don't even care about mom or anything else. His father doesn't show the slightest bit of remorse or sadness. He just looks bored. Leave. I'll leave if you come with me, the man replies. Izuku is taken aback, and he frowns. Why? You asked too many questions. You only answered one. It doesn't matter, his father snaps, his happy facade finally starting to break. There's a crazed look in his eyes, and Izuku feels terrified, but he doesn't let it show. We're leaving now. He stands up from his chair. Well, I can't. Izuku puts his leg back under the cover like this would be enough to protect him. Don't fucking lie, Izuku. He raises his voice. Give me one good reason why you can't. Because he has school. Both of their heads snap to look at the new arrival. The tension in the room shifts unnaturally fast from dangerous to awkward. Aizawa is there, a cup of coffee in hand, and he's looking at Izuku. Their gazes meet and the teenage boy quickly lets his gaze fall to his lap, as if the hospital covers were now 100 times more interesting. His father clears his throat, and Izuku peeks to see Aizawa's attention is now on the other man. I'm sorry, I don't think we've met before. He gives Aizawa an annoyed smile, but the pro-hero's lips don't even twitch. Aizawa Shouta, he answers, not bothering to move his head to face Izuku's father and looking at him from the side. Midoriya's teacher, he clarifies. There's a look of recognition on his father's face, and Izuku can guess where it's from. It's your mother, isn't it? She's seeing someone else, he had said a few days ago. This whole thing should feel stupid. Izuku should laugh about it, but he's not ready for that yet. I think I've heard Izuku talk about you before. Aizawa gives him a tight smile before frowning. And you are Izuku's father. I can't say I've heard a whole lot about you. Izuku's eyes widen. He can't tell whether his teacher is joking or not. Well, it's true, but he hadn't expected his teacher to say something like this to his father. In fact, he hadn't planned to have them interact with each other at all. Okay, well, it was nice meeting you, but I think we'll be fine from here, his father says. Izuku and I were having a private conversation just before you intruded, so I think it's time for you to leave, Mr. Aizawa. It's fine. It's the first time Izuku speaks, and both adults turn their heads to look at him. He feels his face become red and he lowers his gaze. He can stay, he utters in a smaller voice. Izuku, but if you want to leave, I won't mind. You've done it before, Izuku adds, cutting whatever speech his father was about to give. It seems to enrage the man, for obvious reasons. It was an intentional jab, but Izuku isn't scared to speak because he's not alone anymore. You know it was for work, is his father's poor attempt at finding an excuse. Well, it's the same one he's used for years now, and maybe it is true, but Izuku knows it's the not whole truth, either. Come on, give me a chance to make up for the time I've spent away. He fails to mention this time had been years. Anything you want or wish, I'll give it to you. Izuku knows his father doesn't mean any of it. The man only remains calm because there's someone else in the room and he needs to look good. The boy still wonders, though, why is it his father has always put on his mask in front of everyone except for him? Maybe things would have gone differently if he had. Izuku knows what he wants, has known for a while now, but he takes some time to choose his words carefully. I wish you'd leave again soon, he says, and then gaining more confidence, he straightens up and looks straight into the man's eyes. I wish you'd never even come back in the first place. He sees the moment his father breaks, the way his pupils become wide and sharper, the crinkles in his face deeper and his smile falls. The man raises his hand and Izuku braces himself, squeezing his eyes shut. But the strike never comes. After a few seconds, he cracks one eye open and sees Aizawa's hand wrapped around his father's wrist, holding it in place. I think it's time for you to leave, Mr. Midoriya. Izuku's father snatches his hand back and looks back at Izuku. He probably has more he wants to say, but if he does, he keeps it to himself. Right now, this very moment, Izuku feels the first semblance of peace for the past few weeks as he watches his father, this man, this stranger, walk out the door. Is it okay to just let him go? Izuku asks, still staring at the spot his father was a minute ago. Of course not, Aizawa answers. That's why I called the police when I first saw him enter your room. He takes a sip of coffee before coming to sit back on the chair beside Izuku's bed. How did he know it was his father? Or well, how did he know things would turn out like this? His teacher must see the questions on his face because he leans forward to explain himself a bit more. I had my suspicions, and they were confirmed when I overheard you two talking earlier, so I didn't take any chance and called a friend of mine, he explains. The answer doesn't entirely satisfy Izuku, but it will do for now. The next day, Izuku is discharged. Aizawa had spent the previous day and night by his side even though the teen had tried to reassure him he would be fine by himself. It had been a lie, of course, and he was grateful not to be left alone with his thoughts, even if they both stayed silent during most of the time. Izuku is lucky to have brought his uniform in his backpack and to have all his things intact. Well, everything except for his phone. Lucky, the word isn't quite right, but it's what Izuku has been using recently to describe the things that don't go terribly wrong. He's been noticing all of those small moments of luck more lately, and it makes him wonder if life has finally started taking pity on him. That wouldn't be so bad. Going through his bag, Izuku searches for a pair of socks, which he hopes he didn't forget at the apartment. The back of his hand hits something hard and cold. He frowns before reaching for the item again. He pulls it out and freezes. It's a candy box, but he already knows there are no sweets in it. He knows there's money inside. Money meant to save him and his mother, but that's not possible anymore. He wants to open it and make sure it's still there, the last thing she gave him, but his fingers won't budge. All Might's picture stares back at him mockingly, with his signature smile and thumbs up in the air. Izuku can practically hear his mentor say, I'm here. A knock interrupts his staring and pulls him out of his thoughts. Izuku quickly shoves the box inside the pocket of his pants and quickly pulls on the sleeve of his blazer sticking out of his bag. Aizawa creaks the door open, ready to go. Izuku pushes the items he had taken out back inside of his yellow backpack and closes it. He rises to his feet and turns around to face his teacher. Yeah, what's going to happen to me? Izuku and Aizawa were on their way to the dorms, way before class started and early enough so that with enough luck, no one would be up yet. The teen had been thinking about it ever since he woke up. When he understood he had nothing left, save for his dream of becoming a hero. He could stay in the dorms for now, but when summer break would come, where would he go? When everyone leaves to go back to their families, what will become of him? It won't take long before people start to notice. Maybe they already have. His father had said it had been on the news. There hadn't been any names, but he had been able to simply guess. So what stopped his friends from being able to do the same? What do you want to happen? Aizawa asks him, like Izuku could just choose and have it be all right. This might be the only chance you get, a voice in his head supplies. It's not like Izuku has much to lose, anyway. He doesn't know what he wants, but he knows what he doesn't want. Izuku doesn't want to have to leave UA or be sent off to a foster family. He doesn't want people to start treating him differently. I don't want to be alone. Izuku squeezes the metal box still in his left pocket and only lets go when he fears he might bend the cheap metal. They stop, right in front of the stairs leading up to his dorm. The big letters announcing Wano looks down at him, and Izuku feels terribly out of place. You won't be, Aizawa reassures him. They both just keep staring in front of them. Izuku's right shoulder strains under the heavy weight of his backpack and he regrets having put a single strap instead of two. But he doesn't make a move to adjust it. Instead, he stands still. You should go get some rest. The pro hero puts a hand on his shoulder and taps once before letting it fall. He gives him a small smile, but it's not sad like the ones people have been giving him lately or mean like his father's. It's genuine, and perhaps that's why Izuku finds himself falling once again into the trap of thinking and hoping that maybe, just maybe, he'll be okay. Izuku spends the rest of the day alone in his room. He's not sure if his classmates know he's back. He sleeps until classes end and then Aizawa comes to check up on him. He tells the man he'll be fine to go to class tomorrow, but his teacher seems hesitant. I already slept long enough in the hospital, he says to prove his point. In the end, they agree on the afternoon only, because it'll be Friday and it means he'll only have 2 classes, which might be even better. Izuku is excited to have something else to think about, but he's not sure whether he's ready to see his friends yet. Later that night, he wakes up sweating after having a nightmare. His heartbeat eventually slows, and so he goes back to sleep and waits for the night to be over. The next day his limbs feel heavy. They've felt like this every time he woke up since the accident, but today is as though his arms and legs had been replaced by ones of steel. He tells himself it's because the mattress is so comfortable compared to the one at home in the hospital, but that wouldn't be the entire truth. At most, a half-truth. Still, he somehow finds it in him to get out of bed and put on his uniform. It doesn't matter if his All Might themed clock shows 10:24 a.m. when he wakes up, because he's not late for anything yet. When lunch comes by, he starts heading for school. Most people are probably done eating by now, and some might even be waiting in their classrooms already. It's cloudy outside, and the air is damp. It's not the kind of sky that comes before a storm with huge gray clouds. This is the sad, white, empty kind of sky that's simply there, blocking the sun. Izuku had looked at himself in the mirror before leaving, and it wasn't bad, but just enough that people would ask questions. He had stared at his reflection, the bags under his eyes and his unkempt curls, until he had flashes of his mother's tired eyes right before the crash and his father's figure at the hospital. He couldn't bear his own sight for a while after that. Izuku is standing in front of his English classroom door. It's closed, and the second bell already rang a minute ago, but Aizawa had told him he would inform President Mike about Izuku coming to class. There's still the muffled sound of people talking behind the door, so class probably hasn't started yet. Holding his breath, Izuku holds his hand up and knocks on the door with the back of his index finger, once, twice. He doesn't wait for someone to open it, instead doing it himself. The room stills. Every head turns to him, but no one greets him or gives him weird looks. One chair creaks on the floor a bit after being pushed backward, but all eyes are still on him, waiting. Oh, Izuku thinks. They know. The freckled teen swallows and marches towards President Mike's desk, who is also looking at him but with a calmer expression. Everyone seems to be holding their breaths, and it makes Izuku's heart race, but he tries to remain calm. He stops. I'm sorry, he starts. I didn't do the assignment. It's not that he hadn't wanted to, it's that he couldn't. He has the wrinkled paper in his backpack still, but he doesn't want to give it back. Not when he sees the pile of clean sheets all stacked on top of each other on the corner of the pro hero's desk. The pile of assignments. It would be embarrassing to have his copy on top. His illegible, stained sheet. It's all right, listener, it's not a big deal. His teacher offers him a smile. Izuku purses his lips. Not a big deal. He nods once, not meeting the man's eyes. Sorry, he repeats. He walks to his desk, and he contemplates the idea of acting like nothing happened, like everything is fine. Well, that would probably be too weird. His friends would only get even more worried. The whole interaction leaves an awkward silence hanging in the air. President Mike clears his throat and begins the lesson. Everyone is surprisingly quiet around him, in a good way. They don't ask any questions at all, but they don't act like everything is okay, like they would have the week before. Izuku doesn't mind. Aizawa calls him to the teacher's lounge after the day is over. Izuku is sitting down on the couch while the underground hero makes himself some coffee, the sound of the kettle fuming filling up the room. At some point, a minute or two after Izuku arrived, President Mike shows up, too. The voice hero takes a seat on the stool facing Izuku, after the dark-haired man is done. He sits down in the space right next to Izuku and places his mug on the small wooden table. Aizawa rests his elbows on his knees and turns to the smaller boy. Hisashi and I have been thinking, he starts, drawing out the words slowly. His eyes flicker to President Mike, who seems to encourage the man to continue. After your father loses custody of you, which he will. How can you be sure? Izuku cuts in. He's been thinking about this, too. He hadn't asked Aizawa anything about his father after his last visit to the hospital, but he couldn't stop wondering if the police truly had arrested him, if they had brought him all the way to the police station, if they had let him go. We have enough evidence to prove he's not fit to take care of you, President Mike explains. And by we I mean an entire hero school and a few pro-heroes, including us. He smiles, easing the tension in the air. It makes Izuku relax slightly, but he can't truly bring himself to believe them before he sees it for himself. So, Aizawa clasps his palms together. That means you'll need a place to go. Is there anyone who could take you in? For the time being, at least. Izuku swallows. He doesn't have any other family remaining. The closest thing he has to it is Auntie Mitsuki, but he's not sure she would want him there. Or Kaken. He shakes his head. Aizawa stays silent for a moment, and he looks at his husband before turning back to face Izuku. Hisashi and I have been thinking, he repeats, more confidently this time, and we'd like to have you come with us, if you're comfortable with it, that is. We can give you time to think about it, and if you don't want to, we'll understand, President Mike adds. Izuku stares at the blonde, then at the underground hero. There's no way this is real, it couldn't be. This isn't some kind of joke, is it? Aizawa scoffs. No problem, child. We're very serious about this. Dead serious, please, Yamada adds. Izuku feels tears start to gather in the corner of his eye, just enough to make his emerald eyes shine brighter, and then he squeezes the shut and brushes the small tears away with the heel of his palm before they can fall. I'd like that, he answers in a high-pitched voice. The quick answer seems to surprise everyone in the room, including Izuku. Before he has the chance to think and process everything, he throws his arms around Aizawa. In this instant, this special moment, there are no words spoken. There is no use for them. Aizawa stays frozen for 2 or 3 seconds before untensing and hugging Izuku back. Yamato laughs in the background, but it's not unkind. Izuku cries, because of course he does, even though he had meant not to. But they aren't tears of sadness, far from it. He was so terrified of having to give up his dream, leaving Yue, being alone. But now, he knows he won't have to do any of that, and he doesn't feel as scared anymore. A few days later, when Izuku breaks down again because of the trial coming up with his father, Aizawa sits down with him. Everything was happening so fast, it felt like the world was moving forward while Izuku stayed behind. I'll be honest with you, his teacher says, looking straight ahead. It's not going to be fine for a while, he admits, but it does get better eventually. Does it? Yeah. When they both turn to look at each other, Izuku searches the man's eyes for any indication that he might be lying. He doesn't find any. 2 weeks later, the trial ends, and they win. Izuku finally starts to think that maybe Aizawa is right after all. Yeah, Izuku finds himself thinking, it'll get better from here. It's late when Izuku gets back into the dorms. The sun is setting, turning the sky into this vivid orange color fading into a softer shade of pink. He opens the door, his mind elsewhere. He's still a little on edge from everything that's happened this month, but he likes to think things could be a lot worse. He's not sure if that makes him feel better or not yet. Taking off his shoes, Izuku doesn't notice all the eyes on him until he looks up and sees everyone staring at him. Izuku knew this would happen eventually, knew this was coming. His classmates have been treating him like they always would, at least as best as they could, but of course they knew something was wrong. And now, if they didn't know what it was before, they certainly do now. Deku-kun. Uraraka stands up from her seat at one of the tables. The sound of her chair scraping the floor is incredibly loud in the room, but she doesn't seem to notice or mind. She opens her mouth to say something, then closes it again, hesitating. We heard about the trial, she admits. Izuku can't say he's surprised, because he isn't. Of course they would know, would want to know. They're his friends, and they're heroes. Yeah, he whispers, we won, they at least deserve to know this. See, congrats, Uraraka answers, taking a step forward, like it's just the two of them and not the entirety of Class 1 watching them. And, sorry, Izuku frowns, but she continues. Before he can say anything, she bows down, and her voice cracks. Sorry that we didn't make you feel like you could talk to us, and for not noticing sooner. That's all it takes before the others start to do the same, bowing down and uttering sorries. We're very sorry, Midoriya, Mina says, then Kirishima, and everyone else follows. It's fine, but even he isn't convinced by his own words. He walks toward them. Why, you don't have to apologize or do anything at all. They look up, but most of them keep their backs bowed. Until now, Izuku hadn't realized the burden he'd put on his friends' shoulders by keeping this from them. If anyone can understand them, it's him. He would feel the same way if he was in their shoes. If anything, I should be the one to apologize, he says barely above a whisper, but the room is so quiet now that everyone hears. Midoriya, Ada says. It's true. Izuku speaks louder this time, a hollow laugh escaping his throat. If I hadn't been such a coward, none of this would have happened to begin with. The words are already out before he can stop them, and he continues because it doesn't feel like anything matters right now. If I'd just talked to someone and been braver, things wouldn't be like this. Everything would still just be alright and normal. There's a beat, silence, and then Todoroki walks up to him. You don't always have to be brave. Sometimes it's alright to be scared, he says, and Izuku looks up. You're the one who taught me that. Izuku is stunned for a few seconds, and then he shakes his head. But the corners of his lips are turning upwards. You guys are the worst. Everyone returns his smile, tension leaving their bodies, and Izuku hugs Todoroki. It doesn't take long before everyone joins in. And for once, Izuku doesn't cry. What are you going to do with it? Katsuki asks, breaking the peaceful quiet. Izuku is leaning on the railing of the balcony of his room. He's been staring at the All Might candy box in his hands for a few minutes now. The trial is over now, and the funeral took place a week ago, and it's been even longer since he talked with his friends in the common room, but he still can't get himself to open it. He's thought about it, of course, but he never actually did it. I don't know. He runs his fingers over the metallic surface. It's obvious Katsuki wants to ask more question, but he doesn't. It's like Izuku searches for his words, and Katsuki turns his head toward him. If I open it, it makes everything real, like she's really gone. He often wonders what his mother would think if she saw him right now. After a minute has passed, Katsuki speaks. Auntie is a good person, he says, as if he had read his mind. She'd understand that you need some time to adjust. He turns back to look at the starry sky. But I'm pretty damn sure she wouldn't want you to feel like shit forever. Izuku also turns his head away from the blonde to look in front of him. I'm not leaving you. Why, yes you are. His mother wipes the tear rolling down his cheek with her thumb. I'll always be here. Do you promise? I promise. You're right, Izuku whispers. His eyes fall back onto the metal box small enough to fit inside the palm of his hand, and his thumbs brush against the rim of the upper part. He breathes in, and then he lets go. He flips the lid open. There it is, a pile of paper bills neatly folded in half, exactly like he had expected there to be. He reaches for them and then he sees something else. His breath catches in his throat. Underneath the money is more paper, but this one is different. It's the same kind they have at home. Thick white paper with gray lines to take notes, the ones his mother used to write the grocery list. It might be nothing at all. Maybe Izuku is looking too much into this, but something tells him this is important. Unlike the money bills which are folded in two, the paper note is folded in four. Izuku takes it carefully and slowly opens it. The first thing he sees is a picture of himself on his mother's lap taken a few years ago. It's half the size of the compartment, and they're both looking right into the camera, smiling. But this isn't what Izuku's gaze is focused on. No, it's the text behind it, neatly written in blue ink. He puts the picture behind the paper and begins to read. Izuku, you probably won't read this, but I'll write this anyway just in case, for both you and me. I'm sorry about earlier. And everything else before that. There's no excuse, but I still want you to know that I love you more than anything else in this world, and I'm sorry for not listening to you. None of this is your fault. I know you'll probably still blame yourself for a while, but know that I'll never hold you responsible for any of it. I don't know if you'll still be mad at me when you read this, and it's okay if you are. Let's talk about it when you're ready, all right? Mom. By the time he finishes reading, 2 tears have fallen on the paper, smudging a few words. He closes the box, keeping the note and the picture between 2 fingers, and uses his other hand to wipe away the tears in his eyes. It's gonna be fine, Katsuki says, taking Izuku in his arms. If there's one person used to seeing him cry, it's his childhood friend. It's fine, his mother had said. Yeah, Izuku whispers. The heavy weight on his chest remains. It probably always will, but slowly, little by little, it becomes lighter. It will.